Makati Productions presents a Wraith 1-4 story, Dorset Konnair, Fastest to Fly and Fight. Book 1. Triumph. The new Republic's victory at Coruscant has shattered the Empire's grip on the galaxy's heart. Yet in the chaos of collapse, new threats emerge from the ashes. Warlords and admirals carve out their own domains, and the freedom won at such terrible cost remains fragile. On the remote moon of Folor, deep within the Noor system, a secret training base prepares the next generation of starfighter pilots. Among them is Dorset Konnair, a defiant young woman who abandoned Coruscant's elite society to pursue a single dream: to fly faster than anyone has ever flown before. But Folor is no safe haven. The forces of Warlord Zsinj, the mad genius who commands the Super Star Destroyer Iron Fist, have set their sights on the base. As the Imperial hammer falls, Dorset and her squadron must face the enemy with untested skills and unbreakable resolve. In the crucible of war, heroes are not born. They are forged in fire. Prologue. For Snubfighter's 2 A-wings, 2 X-wings roared up above the atmosphereless surface. The moon was a desolate body that would soon be lifeless either because the evacuation was complete, or after Implacable had finished destroying the new Republic base behind the fighters. In the lead A-wing, Flight Officer Dorset Konnair kept her focus on the control panel's terrain imagery section. It was rapidly updating as she zoomed through a canyon. The rock cliffs were little more than a pair of gray and black streaks on either side of her canopy. Her wingman was doing a fair job at keeping up, positioned about 4 meters off her starboard wing. The 2 X-wings were somewhere 2 clicks back, and Dorset took a moment to think of how she would boast to them about her fighter's superiority once this impromptu race was over. She'd come to Folor for training, but the enemy attack meant that they would all have to fight their way out now. Dorset pushed a lock of her dark hair up and under her cloth helmet, trying not to think about how combat against the Star Destroyer's 6 squadrons would likely end. They had 3 squadrons, but General Crespin was keeping the recruits in Gold Squadron as far away as possible since they were so inexperienced. That left Blue Squadron and the X-Wing pilots of Grey, a mystery unit for whom the General held clear disdain. But first we have to get to the assigned location in one piece, without careening into rocks or a valley at one of the turns. The pressure was enough to make her sweat. The training unit had already lost one of its own to reckless flying in these canyons. And she didn't only have herself to worry about. Tetengo was mirroring her movements, and at these speeds he might not have time to pull out if she made a mistake. Then there were the 2 X-wings, and the likelier possibility they would crash as well. Dorset took a deep breath, then pushed all doubts aside. You've trained for this here, back on Coruscant and in the lessons before enlistment. A few bends and zigzags won't be a problem. She glanced back at the trailing pair of X-wings and smiled as they tried to close the distance. This is the story of how Dorset came to be at Folor, and the operations that were to follow. Chapter 1. The day Coruscant fell turned out to be one of the best in Dorset Konnair's life. It had been a spectacle from start to finish, and the 8-year-old had a close-in view for much of the fighting given her family's home near the middle of a central city sky tower. First came a sudden air battle between TIE fighters and a few Z-95 headhunters, all during one of the most intense lightning storms the city had ever seen. Not caring about the danger or the rain, she had run out onto the sky tower balcony with a pair of macro binoculars to get a better view of the maneuvers. Then the planetary shield fell, and she watched with rapt anticipation as tiny specks appeared in orbit, each one a capital ship from the new Republic fleet that had arrived. Finally her parents pulled her away, insistent that they take shelter in one of the underground bunkers. Dorset may have been born 7 years after the Empire was created, but they still remembered how bad the separatist attack on Coruscant near the end of the Clone Wars had been for the global city. As the three were running out of the Skytower's ground level carrying only their most precious possessions, Dorset glanced back up toward the sky, now full of fleeing luxury vessels. Above them, though, she saw one of the planet's orbital mirrors lock into a new position and blast a beam of solar energy into one of the Golan defense stations. It was a mesmerizing display. The station slowly splintered under the translucent sunbeams, cracking apart like a cheap panel of transparasteel wood in slow motion. Dorset watched, transfixed, as random bits of debris that crossed between the mirror and its target sparkled and ignited. Then her mother had seized her by the upper arms and was hauling her inside the shelter, seconds before the doors sealed. The bunker was dimly lit, the sound from outside muffled but still audible. Dorset could hear the shriek of ties overhead turn into the occasional explosion, followed by the duller tones of either Z-95 or X-Wing engines. The New Republic definitely seemed to be winning, though minutes later she heard one of their fighters streak past, overheating, and then a building collapsed. After almost 90 minutes, they heard transports landing and troops disembarking. Soon came the directive via an augmented comm link that it was safe and everyone should come out. We're really part of the New Republic now, Dorset thought with glee. She resisted the urge to cheer, though, on the off chance she was wrong and they were about to be greeted by Imperial stormtroopers. She'd had little love for the Empire, even though she'd been resigned to the idea of joining its ranks soon for the flight training they would provide. From there, Dorset planned to either defect and join the New Republic if the opportunity arose, or failing that make a living in the fringe as a smuggler or even a podracer. At her core, flying a fast ship had always been part of the goal. Now she could skip the morally questionable step of Imperial service altogether and go straight into New Republic enlistment. Dorset's announcement to her parents the next evening did not go over well with them, as she'd kept her plans secret so they wouldn't try to quell them again. The Konairs had not been part of the Imperial government, but still occupied a place on the secondary tiers of Coruscant high society. They had wanted Dorset, an only child, to take up some esteemed profession that would move them as a family further up that chain, and consider flying as a hobby, but she was determined to go her own way and didn't need their permission. Days later, Dorset finally entered a New Republic military service center to enlist. This delay came not because of her parents' desperate request that she think it over more, but so that her latest tattoo could be completed. Like the others, it came in varying shades of blue. Dorset had 5 of them already, including a diamond on her left upper arm and an avian on the opposite side. Unlike most on Coruscant, her parents had named her in the old tradition of both a first name and a middle one, and so, Cora was stenciled in and underlined below the avian. As usual, she found her parents' action to be pretentious, but this time Dorset liked the result. One of her childhood toys had been a plush avian she'd called Cora as well, inspiring the tattoo. Above her heart she carried the star clusters which could be seen in the night sky of Metelos, the core planet where her distant ancestors lived before moving to the galactic capital world. Dorset's legs bore matching tattoos as well, sinuous lines that started at her ankles and circled their way up, flaring out across her thighs to end as the sparkling tail of twin comets on her hips. They began in a pastel shade of blue, then changed repeatedly to end in an almost purple color. In keeping with the plan to temporarily join the Empire, she had adhered to its rule against any tattoos that would be visible outside of the flight uniform, but now that wasn't a problem for her. The new addition was a star flare curving around her right eye, a reminder of what she'd seen on the ground as Coruscant fell to the New Republic. The beams shot out in 4 angles, one up, the next diagonal, a third horizontal, and then the last pointed down diagonally and stopped at the edge of Dorset's wavy black hair, shifting from light blue like her eyes to a dark hue there. Once she'd completed recruitment processing and initial aptitude tests, Dorset was relieved to have her request for flight track approved. Her stature would help point in the preferred direction of speed as well. Unlike the Empire, the New Republic's A-wing interceptors were far smaller than their other snub fighters, and Dorset was short and slim to match the compact cockpit's size. Next came a short interview with a somewhat annoying Belosar intelligence officer and his even more intimidating repurposed droid standard for new Coruscanti recruits, to ward off infiltrators, and then she departed for the newly established training center in an old Imperial building. The New Republic flight curriculum was much more abbreviated than what Dorset had heard about the Imperial one, with far less emphasis on unrelated topics. Unlike those preparing for TIEs, these pilot candidates did have to learn astronavigation and maintenance, as well as practicing basics of ground combat in case their base was ambushed by stormtroopers. Training was supposed to be short, unlike the years of study at elite Imperial academies, but Dorset's time was disrupted almost immediately. Non-humans on the planet started contracting a previously unseen virus, and then Imperial forces who remained began a series of insurgent attacks on military locations, schools, and even the medical facilities now in high demand. The New Republic needed humans with viral immunity who could work in those facilities more than rookie pilots, and she found herself spending 2 or 3 days on medical duty for every one in the classroom or undergoing flight qualification practice and simulations. It was grueling but necessary work, helping treat the sick and at least making conditions easier for the dying. In time after Rogue Squadron was once again said to have saved the day, Dorset returned to full-time flight instruction. That meant a rigorous schedule of simulator training and qualifying in Z-95 headhunters like the ones she'd seen over Coruscant during the battle, and R-22s, the civilian variant of the A-Wing that she already had some experience with through paid lessons. The pace was exhausting, but Dorset didn't care. It was everything she had ever dreamed of. Finally, graduation day arrived. They'd earned their wings, certifying the group as official New Republic pilots. It even merited the return of Captain Clivian, one of the 2 senior instructors who had been overseeing the program before Captain Sormick took over. Scuttlebutt claimed he'd gone to Rogue Squadron, while the other former instructor was now in a top-secret unit. Captain Clivian was reading off pilot names and giving each their wings. Dorset had seen him lead the temporary Rogue Squadron to welcome the real unit back from their semi-authorized back-to-war excursion weeks before, and the predictable display of precision maneuvering that ensued. They have their role, she had thought, but X-Wing pilots are all show and no speed. Soon it was her turn in the alphabetical list. While flight instruction might have been over, most still had to complete time in a training unit before obtaining an official posting in a frontline role. Receiving their wings was only part of the day's affair. They were also learning what came next. Konnair Dorset Blue Squadron, Clivian announced. She remained standing at attention, but allowed herself a small smile in representation of her excitement at the posting. Blue Squadron was A-Wings, exactly as hoped. Dorset would have taken an X-Wing assignment if ordered, even B-Wings, sluggish as they were, if there was no other choice. But Y-Wings, sluggish and old? That would have been a nightmare for Dorset. The ceremony soon ended. A day after congratulations from the instructors and celebrations with the other cadets, Dorset reported to the GR-75 Bright Nebula for deployment to a location that was being withheld for security reasons. She was able to watch from the viewport as they entered the system, though, and saw a drab gray moon orbiting a yellow-green planet. Her interrupted class time meant Dorset was being folded into an existing group that had been trained in basic flight instruction at the desolate base already, and like her group on Coruscant had just reached the point of graduation into advanced combat maneuvers as well. In addition to being a human from what used to be Imperial Center, now I'm the criffing new guy. She wasn't fond of that thought, but at least it would be exciting once she got to know the group. Chapter 2. Dorset sighed and ran a hand through her black hair, sweating slightly in her dress uniform. She had plenty of experience with it from graduation and other formal events, but still felt no love for the damn thing. It consisted of a black bodysuit up to the neck and a heavy white coat with red striping on one side. The bodysuit had no sleeves, which would have been good except that the coat was rough and scratchy on her skin. Dorset had considered wearing a third layer under her coat, but the whole ensemble was already too hot. She guessed it had been dreamt up on Hoth. The GR-75 shook slightly as it moved out of orbit and began its landing approach, guided in by communications from the base rather than visual signals. Dorset sat down and drank water from a bottle strapped to her carry-all bag, waiting for the departure announcement. The bag held her flight suits, 4 separate sets of coveralls, boots, undergarments and additional civilian clothes. Personal items included a few holos from home, and an engraved model of the ancient Delta 6 she'd flown before enlistment. Separate from the carry-all was a smaller issue bag for her life support system vest and flight helmet. While new Republic trainees all received powder blue flight suits with white and orange stripes, they were at least able to personalize their helmets. As an A-wing pilot, Dorset's helmet consisted of a hard shell in the standard New Republic style, but with cloth flaps for the headset rather than full head protection. She'd painted it a base layer of scarlet, adding a dark blue rebel crest to the left side. The right half carried a checker pattern of the same dark blue shade and cerulean. This mirrored her old Delta 6 Sprites paint scheme. The trip from Coruscant to her destination had been uneventful, though that left Dorset to dwell on her parents' reaction. While they had understood the importance of driving out the Empire in principle, having their daughter join up was harder to accept. Once they finally moved past that, they insisted she take up something prestigious like Fleet Command or pursue a track such as medicine or law that would elevate her, and by extension them in society after she was done. Dorset had been even more stubbornly focused on a starfighter track, and took their reaction and accompanying withdrawal away from her as a sign that they didn't think she could even make it through basic flight training. Eventually the messages between them stopped. Dorset couldn't remember who had sent the last one anymore. It was easier than fighting at least. The disagreement followed years of tension between Dorset and her parents. They at first took her childhood interest in star vessels as a curiosity to laugh about with friends and other guests at their society dinners, particularly how Dorset then nearly one had delivered her first words by pointing toward herself with the thumb. "I want," then jabbed a finger in the air. "Fly." They tolerated her desire for years after that, but it first came to a head when Dorset, at 10, began to decorate her room with old holos of famous pilots, an old Republic ace who defied the Hutts, another who specialized in races until she died aged 26, one last seen in the unknown regions. Her father sat her down and insisted that piloting was a pastime, but not a career to consider. Dorset had stomped off to her room and refused to come out for the rest of the next 2 days. By 1-1, she'd convinced them to let her try riding in a vintage starfighter. Dorset suspected that they only agreed in the hope the maneuvers would be too frightening or nausea-inducing for her to continue her aspirations any further. It had the opposite effect, though, Soon she was using her share of a family inheritance to pay for more lessons, and then came the Delta 6 purchase. Her parents' next attempt came soon after that. When Dorset was 1 they showed her example after example of high-paying, safer careers that they thought were much more prestigious than being a pilot, no matter how little of an effect their arguments were having with their daughter. "Look," they told her one day over a mid-morning holo broadcast. "This actress hasn't gotten so much attention since her Ormond nomination, and all she's done is announce her engagement." Dorset made her lack of interest clear by yawning until the broadcast said the woman's suitor was one of the best Imperial pilots. Information about such individuals was usually kept under tight secrecy, so she suddenly wanted to know everything, much to her parents' consternation. As she grew older, Dorset learned how to better balance their demands and her own dreams, even if that meant pretending to be interested in the careers of their choosing. She had played along until the New Republic enlistment, then abandoned the act and let them deal with it. "Bright Nebula has now landed. All passengers prepare to depart," the captain announced over the comm, interrupting Dorset's thoughts. She slung her carryall over her right shoulder and took the flight bag in her left hand, then fell in line to disembark for this new home. Still wearing the irritating dress uniform, Dorset set her 2 bags down at the entrance into the commander's office and knocked sharply twice. She'd heard stories about General Crespin in the waning days of her training and on the ride over from Coruscant. He was a tough instructor, they'd said, though not as harsh on recruits as Wing Commander Varth was described as being. Dorset was quite glad to have not been assigned to one of Varth's squadrons. Given what she had been told, she understood the need for discipline, but wanted to have some fun along the way. Under Varth, life was a constant series of drills, fitness tests, and classroom instruction. The only relief came during the mandatory hours of sleep all pilots were required to obtain in order to fly. Varth's unit had left the base a few weeks ago, so she'd come close to being stuck with him. Dorset shook the stray thoughts away as General Crespin called for her to enter. He sat at a desk, finishing some paperwork on a datapad as she marched in and offered her best salute, determined to make a good impression. "Flight Officer Konnair reporting as ordered, sir." "At ease. Take a seat," he replied as he gestured to one in front of her. Dorset did, noticing for the first time that another pilot sat by the desk and also wore the flight suit of Blue Squadron. While Crespin was in his late 30s and balding with a distinctive patch over what had been his left eye, the other man looked to be in his early 20s and had upswept hair with a dark goatee. The combination seemed foreboding, but Dorset thought he had kind eyes. "Captain Lark, Blue Squadron's executive officer," Crespin said as he gestured toward the man. "So why are you here, Flight Officer Konnair?" The question wasn't what she expected, and Dorset took a moment to think before answering it. "I saw the liberation of Coruscant, and the role New Republic pilots played in it firsthand from the ground. It would be an honor to provide a similar service to other worlds myself, sir." "That's a good explanation for why you joined Starfighter Command," the general replied. "But I want to know what made you seek out the A-Wing specifically. Don't answer that now, just listen closely to what I have to say. This snub-fighter you'll fly is little more than a pair of engines with a pilot, fuel and missiles attached. It is not to be trifled with. One wrong move, one overcorrection, and you could be splattered across 1,000 meters of the ground or the hull of a capital ship. This is not a snub fighter that just anyone can hop in and start flying. I can't afford to have pilots who are timid or reckless under those conditions. Your predecessor voluntarily withdrew upon initial flights and is to be commended for it. A-Wing pilots are regularly called upon to serve as the vanguard of the fleet in large-scale engagements, and that comes at a high cost. You should also know that I can't even guarantee every pilot in Blue Squadron will survive this training process. If you're here for fame or want to use this unit to get a prestigious post such as application for Rogue Squadron, it would be better for everyone if you leave now. Dorset didn't flinch at any of Crespin's lecturing. For what it's worth, sir, I do have experience with the A-Wings earlier R-22 model both in official flight training and before that as a civilian. She'd also had brief flights in an old V-Wing through Imperial youth recruitment efforts. But Dorset held no intention of mentioning that as part of her new Republic qualifications. She had logged her time spent in the Delta 6, however, which probably helped get on the A-Wing track. I'm aware of that, Flight Officer, but that's what concerns me. At best, you may have to unlearn the lessons of civilian flight instruction. And worst case, I'm dealing with a pilot who believes she already knows everything and doesn't need to pay attention all the time. Is that the case here? She was naturally quite pale, a side effect of growing up on Coruscant under the orbital mirrors, but Dorset felt her cheeks flush red at his somewhat scathing reply. No, sir. I'll pay attention. Good. The training schedule will include 2 or more simulator exercises per day, class-based discussion and occasional flights in A-Wings without live fire capability. The base is located on a moon of Noor called Folor. As you could tell on the way in, security has to be placed at a premium. That damned mess with Talon Squadron. Crespin's voice trailed off as he glanced toward the executive officer next to him. Well, if you were a spy, you'd bring the bombardment down on your own head, and if you tried to take an A-Wing and run away, I'd kill you myself. Dorset blinked, taken aback at the general's sudden vehemence. Sir? I don't understand. Sorry, Flight Officer, Crespin said, and for a change he looked chagrined this time. I just met with the former commander of Talon Squadron. It's clear there was someone acting within the New Republic forces and they arranged for Zsinj's forces to be able to carry out the ambush. I see, Dorset said. Are they rebuilding Talon Squadron? I saw a few X-Wings on the way in. No, Crespin answered flatly. I'm afraid not. That's a special project Commander Antilles has been working on here. His face had shifted into an unmistakable look of disapproval. Since you're new to the base, I recommend keeping distance from them. Most should be washouts. Very well. In answer to your earlier question, I wanted A-Wings because they're faster and in my opinion better than the other snub fighters. I can handle the risks that brings, Dorset said confidently. It's also been my understanding that pilots of specific fighters often stick together. Chapter 3. General Crespin nodded, then glanced at someone in the hallway. Officer Noor, can you show this new trainee to her quarters? She's bunking with Rushi Yivit in Section B, Room 2. Oh, and Konnair? We're here to learn to fly and fight, not to march around in parade format. You can take that ridiculous dress uniform off and stick to just wearing flight suits while you're on duty. Dorset smiled, then shifted back into a more neutral expression and thanked him. She saluted, turning around to collect her things in the hallway, and followed Noor to her new quarters while slipping out of the dress coat immediately. It had felt especially irritating on her arm tattoos. Her guide was also off-duty and so wore utility pants with a sleeveless shirt. She guessed based on his persistent tan that he was originally from an agrarian world. It could have been a result of repeated trips to Noor, but Dorset doubted General Crespin allowed many of those. She was partly right. Tetengo Noor, as he identified himself, grew up on the more sophisticated planet of Churba, but his family lived in a farm-heavy area making wine and other liquors. Tetengo talked a lot, Dorset quickly learned that he originally had two siblings. An older brother had died fighting the Empire, and a younger sister now flew a transport hauler. Unlike Dorset, he was still very close with his parents, and they would talk over holocom calls regularly. Tetengo had been training at Folor for more than 2 months now, and offered a vivid description of lunar valleys and other passages Dorset would soon have to navigate and get used to flying through. It reminded Dorset of one of the frequent simulator runs she'd done while in her initial training on Coruscant, speeding through a city while pursuing and evading different types of ties. At least this time there wouldn't be any risk of civilian casualties if someone made a mistake. "So how's the base when we're not flying?" Dorset asked him. It would be quite different from her time on Coruscant, that much was clear, with little creature comforts beyond their quarters. "You get used to it. There's not much beyond exercise facilities and a small arms practice range, but at least we have downtime. That's what passes for a bar on base. You should come by this evening after you've unpacked your bag. We used to have Folor to ourselves, until Commander Antilles' new special squadron showed up." "Did General Crespin tell you about that group?" "Mainly that he's not fond of them," Dorset answered. "It seems like there's some secret unit." "Yeah, they all have extra skills beyond piloting. Sniping, slicing, demolitions, linguistics, you name it. Some hand-to-hand experts too, and Lieutenant Jansen's a crack blaster pistol shot." "Lieutenant West Jansen?" "Yeah, why?" "He was running part of my training classes before, until he got pulled for a special assignment. Guess I know what that was now." They'd reached her new quarters, and Noor knocked on the door twice. "Flight Officer Yivit?" Tetengo asked stiffly. "General Crespin sent me to show your new bunkmate the way over." He handed Dorset her carry-all, then turned sharply and left. Her bunkmate Rushi was a female Radian with mottled red and green skin. They shook hands in greeting, and Dorset hid amusement at the cool scaly feel of Rushi's fingers against her own. Initial introductions concluded, Dorset ducked out of the way and immediately removed the rest of her dress uniform, then pulled on an infinitely more comfortable light blue flight suit instead. The two then worked together to empty out her bags, and Rushi looked curiously between the model Delta 6 and matching painted flight helmet. "You have your own starfighter?" she asked. Dorset laughed. "Not really. It's pre-Clone Wars. I picked it up heavily used and had to do some of the replacement work myself. Sure is a joy to fly it though. I have some holos I can show ya." The Radian nodded. "That would be nice. Most members of Blue and Gold squadrons had no real flight experience before they joined. Tetengo and I had some, but that was in freighters." Dorset smiled, then blinked in confusion. "The way he talked, I thought the two of you didn't know each other well. Am I wrong? Now it seems like there's a familiar basis there instead." Rushi's mottled facial features shifted to fully red, a change Dorset found endearingly human. "We've sort of been seeing each other, I think that's the basic term, in our time off duty," she explained. "General Crespin probably wouldn't approve. I'd been expecting Tetengo to come here before I knew you were arriving. He acted all formal to warn me he wasn't alone then." "Understood. Well, my bags are unpacked, thanks for the help, so I guess I'll look around the base and run some A-Wing tests. Tetengo recommended I go by downtime. See you at 19-0? Rushi took a moment to grasp Dorset's meaning before the thin mouth beneath her proboscis curved into an unmistakable grin. She crossed her arms, hands flat on her shoulders in salute. "If you need a guide, my friend Roaven can help show you around. She's in room B5. "Got it, thanks. If I return, I'll knock twice first." Dorset winked at the Radian, then left their room. She passed Tetengo in the corridor, and smiled at his attempt to look like he just happened to be coming back around. "Good to see you again," Dorset teased. "I know, but don't worry about it." Ignoring his flustered reaction for a change, the man had nothing to say. Dorset walked off, a spring in her step as she headed out to see the base. After 50 meters, she broke into a jog and only stopped when she saw a few other pilots, introducing herself to them along the way. First were two Bahans, one with black fur while the other's was silver. Dorset learned they were Liaper of Blue Squadron and Yursk, Grinder, Thriag of Grey. Liaper was congenial in the brief conversation, but the other Bahan had little to say to her. Dorset brushed it aside and kept on, rounding a bend in the corridor and running into a dark-haired man focused on a datapad. "Sorry," she told him, a moment before she recognized the man as her former flight instructor Lieutenant Jansen. "Let me get that for you." Dorset retrieved his datapad off the floor and saw it displayed a purchase order from a prominent Coruscant-based maker of child's toys. "I won't ask what this is about, sir. Undoubtedly he's up to some new prank on Commander Antilles." Jansen grinned, securing the datapad under an arm. Yub, Flight Officer Konnair." Dorset continued her jog once she'd gotten around the corner, and kept at it for 300 more meters until she reached an escalator dug into the lunar cave. A blue-skinned Twi'lek was ahead of her, wearing the flight suit of their squadron, and carrying a black flight helmet altered to fit her Leku. "Are you Roaven?" Dorset asked. "I'm Rushi's new bunkmate. She mentioned you." "Yes. You must be Dorset. I talked to Tetengo after he took you to your new quarters." Roaven smiled easily and knowingly. "I guess Tetengo and Rushi's relationship isn't so secret after all." "Did they give you a short name yet?" Roaven asked her. "We've been making them for each other during training based on how we fly and other things. I'm Twin Tails." She touched her Leku with a grin. "And then there's Tango, Rush, and my bunkmate Rady. Speaking of which," Roaven waved to a red-haired woman who just exited the armory 50 meters away. "Rady Alphilian, meet Dorset Konnair," the Twi'lek said once the woman had reached them, her hair pulled back and an empty holster on her hip. "I was trying to come up with a short name." Rady laughed, a set of freckles appearing as she did, and then spoke in a raspy tone. "We could wait to see how she flies first. How about it, Dorset? You set to go in simulators, 2 TIE interceptors versus an A-wing?" "Are you serious?" Dorset asked, cracking her knuckles. "I'm always ready for a dogfight." They each took a simulator cockpit and powered on the same exercise, a battle in an asteroid field. Dorset grinned. She had trained for such tight spaces already and held an advantage in the smaller size of an A-wing compared to a TIE. Blinking lights signaled the fighters, 10 clicks away and closing. Dorset accelerated up and toward them, knowing she'd have to engage fast before one would try to swing around behind her while the other tried to keep her distracted. Once she'd gotten high enough, Dorset dipped her nose slightly so she'd be coming in with the star at her back. Starfighters were often limited to displaying enemy positions on a flat surface, so Roaven and Rady wouldn't know she was above them right away either. At 2 clicks apart, Dorset rolled her A-wing over and swiveled the twin blaster cannons into a 3-5-degree angle. In range at 1 kilometer of separation, she opened fire on the distant TIE interceptors below. The TIE on the left was quicker to see her, and react by pulling up sharply. The unlinked shots missed it but holed the right side TIE after 10 seconds, spinning it off into an asteroid. Now the remaining TIE interceptor angled to attack as Dorset worked to bracket it in with her own fire. The two starfighters weaved back and forth, dodging each other's lasers, It was a dance Dorset had practiced plenty already in training and imagined for years before that. Neither landed a kill shot before they crossed, and then came the desperate maneuvering to get on the tail of their opponent. The interceptor took off at a 90-degree angle away from the star, but Dorset followed suit and swiveled her laser cannons upward. Your squint needs to face me to shoot, I don't. 7 seconds and 3 sets of ranged shots later, the TIE interceptor was a rapidly spreading collection of space debris. The A-wing canopy faded to white as it lifted up, and Dorset climbed halfway out to look over toward the TIE cockpit pods. Roaven had been the longer-lasting pilot. Want to go again, 2 A-wings on 1? Dorset asked coolly. The opposing pair nodded, eager for a chance to even the score under the better odds she had offered them. They didn't get it. Chapter 4. Dorset only died in 3 of the 1-0 matches that followed, and 2 of those came after she was able to knock off one of the competitors with her. The best performance was during a return to the asteroid field, where she daringly led them on pursuit into the thickest area. Dorset quickly dropped down onto an asteroid using repulsors and powered off, letting the rock's slow roll bring her back in position to catch the 2 A-wings from behind as they passed in a search pattern. When their simulator canopies lifted after that, only Roaven looked amused. Rady was visibly cross at the drubbing, and Dorset nervously wondered if she had overplayed her hand there. Think about it this way, Roaven told the red-haired woman. If we had lost like that dog fighting against Levick, he would keep bringing it up all week. Maybe we can get her to go against him. Dorset hopped down from her A-wing simulator, which resembled an actual fighter if it had been cut down to just the cockpit section. I didn't mean to embarrass you in there, she began. But I won't hold my skills back at 50% either. That would be disrespectful. Once training is over, we all need to be as sharp as we can to fight our real enemies, the imps, warlords, and pirates. Rady nodded grudgingly, and Dorset guessed the woman was from Corellia. She had seen this kind of attitude all the time at the spaceports her parents didn't want her to frequent as a child. You had starfighter training before you enlisted. Rady told Dorset it wasn't really a question. Yup, since I was about 1-2, she answered. I've been preparing for this a long time. If you want, I can give some pointers about how those engagements were so successful for me at dinner? Yes, let's do that, Roaven answered before Rady could respond. What did I say? Soon she'll be taking Levick down a few pegs. There's that other pilot again, he must be the one. Almost every group of pilots New Republic, Imperial, or otherwise had at least one who was full of ego. Dorset knew she could easily cross into that territory herself, but preferred to let her performance do the talking instead. Undoubtedly that would pit her against this Levick soon. The 3 ate at downtime, talking about their respective backgrounds. Rady was from Corellia as Dorset had guessed, while Roaven launched into a description of Ryloth and how cold Folor Base was by comparison. Dorset smiled at that. Her Delta 6 lacked temperature controls due to its age, and she'd had to grow used to it. Ryloth could probably get twice as hot on a bad day. While Roaven still wore a standard New Republic trainee flight suit, she'd been allowed to add a few items in keeping with Twi'lek warrior tradition: fingerless gloves, 2 vibroblades on a belt, and a Savari flash pistol rather than the issued DC-17 compact blaster with a folding stabilizer. Roaven had been motivated to join Starfighter Command by the stories of a Twi'lek from her clan who had gained renown in Rogue Squadron, though he had been injured in the Thyfera campaign and could no longer fly. The woman was 2 meters tall, and Dorset wondered how she could even fit in an A-wing, but then Ryloth's home-designed fighters used TIE cockpits despite the species' generally taller nature, so they must be used to the discomfort it brought. Rady's interest in becoming a pilot also stemmed from her homeworld, which had produced many known for fast freight ships like Solo, Rindar and the Terex, but also starfighter pilots such as Antilles, Fell, Horn and Ghent. Undoubtedly she sought to be included among them. Dorset even acknowledged her own background as a Coruscanti, figuring that if she would begin trusting these pilots with her life, then she could at least admit where she came from. Roaven and Rady seemed to take it in stride, with neither holding it against her. They had particular interest in her story of seeing the liberation of Coruscant from the ground. Once the dinner conversation was over, Dorset retrieved her flight bag placed outside her room and headed toward the hangar. She'd managed to win Rady back over with stories of other Corellians' role in taking Coruscant, as well as an explanation of how she was able to track positions of enemy fighters around her A-wing to better use the rotating cannons on them. They also continued the discussion on an abbreviated name to use for her. Rady had offered ideas drawing on Dorset's Coruscanti background to her annoyance before Roaven settled it, tapping a finger to the tattoo framing her eye. "They're your Dorset Folor Konnair now." Dorset grinned at the new sobriquet, which fit her name, her face, and her attitude. "I'll take it." Friends had called her Dors growing up, but she'd wanted a more distinctive option as a pilot. Roaven and Rady had returned to their quarters, while Dorset headed to the hangar some 200 meters away. She showed her pass to the base's hangar chief, an old veteran wearing high-vis coveralls striped in lime and white, and was sent on to the direction of her assigned A-wing. Dorset wasn't authorized to take off yet, not on her own, but she could power up the engines at least. She put on her gloves and helmet, then hopped in with the canopy open. Lifting off on repulsor lifts, Dorset slowly moved the A-wing over to the nearest unoccupied test bay, an area marked by red paint on the hangar floor and exhaust-singed paint on the gray wall. Once the snub fighter was in place, she lowered the landing gear and then set up blocks to keep it in place during the engine test. Climbing back into the cockpit, Dorset turned on the right J77 engine and let it run for a minute, then did the same with the left engine. She listened to the hum, and each change in pitch as the power increased up from 20%, her eyes shut to block out any distractions. Once the engines were off, Dorset climbed out and waited for them to cool. The manual said that required at least 5 minutes, and she had no intention of being burned by cutting it short. The hangar was mostly empty, so she pulled on old maintenance coveralls, no sense in dirtying up her flight suit, and began inspecting the forward sensor section. Dorset ran her hands over the paneling, feeling where paint had been added to cover over carbon scoring. The A-wing may have been new to her, but it had certainly seen combat already. She reached into her flight bag and found a bottle of lubricant, applying it to the laser cannon's swivel mount until Dorset was sure they were capable of full rotation. She guessed the fighter was a Mark 1B variant modified to have 360 degrees of aim, rather than the newer Mark II that was built with it. Next she checked that the flight control systems were in full working order, using an air sprayer to remove any bits of space debris that might have lodged their way inside. Dorset squeezed in the gap between the engines afterward, feeling the air turn to steam on either side. She tested both stabilizers and the deflector shield generator, making sure all power and diagnostic lines were connected properly. Once those pre-flight checks were done, she turned to the engines. That would require tools, so Dorset walked over to the nearest supply stand and gathered up a hydrospanner, head-mounted light band, a spare tray, and a wheel brace to hold the engines. Sliding under the right engine, she gripped the spanner in her teeth and pulled on the light band. Dorset had memorized this exact sequence as a teen, easily disconnecting the bolts and other components that held the J77 Event Horizon engine in place, and collecting them in the tray braced on her stomach. The process was easily repeated on the left side, after which Dorset slid the engines out onto the brace and began to inspect them for any possible improvement. As Dorset had expected based on their sounds, she soon found ionization build up in the heat exchanger and power generator of the right engine. A quick trip back to the supply stand and she was soon working away with a scouring rod to clear out those components. That left her hands and bare forearms streaked with grease, but Dorset accepted it as a brief cost of work. Dorset was cleaning her fingers off on an old cloth when two actual mechanics approached. "Just what you need, Codge, some pilot who thinks she can fly and do our jobs better," the man closer to her said. He was stocky and wore a set of coveralls so stained she couldn't tell what the original color had been. Dorset could appreciate that, considering how patched hers were. Still, Dorset was worried she'd seen how territorial mechanics could be. To them, starfighters were property merely loaned out to pilots, and changes required permission. She would have asked, but the hangar had been deserted except for the chief and a table of sabacc players. "I don't know, Dane, we did have heat exchanger cleaning on the list for tonight," drawled the second man. He was much leaner than the other one, and his coveralls were clean enough to show patches for blue and gold squadrons as well as an older one of the rebel crest in gray. Dorset's eyes narrowed. "Codge Yelder?" she asked the man curiously, and he nodded. Yelder was an engineer and sometime pilot who worked with Generals Dodana and Blissex in developing the Rebels' RZ-1A wing, based off the original Quat Systems Engineering R-22 civilian model. "It's a pleasure to have you working with us," Dorset said before shaking the man's hand firmly, slightly in awe. "If you don't mind my asking, what led you to get so involved in maintenance?" Yelder shrugged. "The war's mostly stable, and we're not at the point of having to develop new snub fighters for dedicated purposes any more now that B-wing production is well underway. Plus this way I'm not a high-value target for the imps. I can go see my family regularly too." He turned to the other mechanic. "How old's your Zindra now? Just turned 6, right?" The stockier man nodded. "Aye. And of course she wants to be a pilot when she grows up." Once they'd left, Dorset finished pushing the engines back in place and refastened the bolts before washing her arms off. The chronometer showed 1850, so she headed for downtime. Chapter 5. Dorset slid into the bench next to Tetengo, who was sitting opposite Rushi at the table. A pair of other pilots, a Celestin and a Duros, were alongside Rushi as well. She hadn't met them yet. "Hopefully this sets aside any concerns that I have a problem with aliens, being from Coruscant and all." "Dorset Konnair," she said, extending a hand across the table to the Celestin first. "D'Aviotin," replied the diminutive pilot. He was around 1.3 meters tall, she guessed, providing an advantage in the cramped confines of an A-wing. Dorset's nearly 1.6 meters fell just within the comfortable range. The Duros, taller than both of them, was Leviktine, the one Roaven and Rady had discussed as the training squadron's most hotshot pilot Dorset could challenge. "So, do you know anything about our XO?" Rushi asked the group, picking up the conversation that had been ongoing before Dorset arrived. "We've been focused on learning what we can of General Crespin. He's clearly very focused on instilling discipline, being ex-Imperial and all. I've heard Crespin lost the eye during a raid at No Quivzer," Dorset answered, drinking some of her Laman ale. "I don't know anything about the captain though, not even where he's from." "I think he fought at Ender," Tetengo said. "I believe he made wing commander after that, but I don't know if it's true since he's a captain now. Supposedly he got bumped back down in rank for making some unauthorized comm challenges to these Imperial pilots a couple years ago." Dav nodded. I know the ender part's true. I heard about him from Ten Num. He mentored my younger cousin Lasat and I. The name drew some raised eyebrows from the other pilots. Ten Num had been a member of the Blue Squadron incarnation of that time, and helped Green Squadron, then an actual A-Wing unit, take down Vader's own Super Star Destroyer Executor. I heard he's strictly assigned for training support, no more combat duty, Rishi said a moment later, keeping her voice down as there were pilots from Grey Squadron nearby. The story a few gold pilots passed on to me is that a year after Ender, the captain's unit went in pursuit of this Imperial frigate. They tried to follow it based on hyperspace jump analysis, but the data was off and the rest of them ended up dropping out too close to a star. Poor guy, assuming it's true. That's not how I heard it, but it's close, Levick replied smugly and louder. My intel came from Bana, a Grey Squadron washout who fancied himself a slicer. They were getting chased in a star cluster, and the imps would wait until their A-Wings were about to jump, then swarm one fighter and take it out. By the end of it, only the captain was left from the entire squadron. Hey! The sharp exclamation came from someone seated behind the 3 Blue Squadron pilots who had jumped up and turned to face them. The woman, tall and severe-looking with hair about as dark as Dorset's, wore a flight suit that showed she was from Grey Squadron. Her hands were balled into fists, and she glared toward the 5 A-Wing pilots collectively. You ought to keep your criffing mouths shut about stuff you don't know, the woman continued, looking ready to fight the group of them if they forced the issue. 2 of the other pilots stood with her, though the Mon Calamari had placed an arm in front of the angry one, and the blonde woman from Grey Squadron also looked reluctant. Take it easy, Fallon, she murmured. Dorset, Rushi and Tetengo looked guiltily at each other before their gaze shifted to the one Grey pilot not standing. Even on a bench, the man sat stiffly upright and could have been a statue if not for the occasional blink and infrequent sips of what looked to be CAF rather than ale. They had heard he was the one who had led Talon's squadron briefly, only to lose them all in an ambush. Clearly our story hit a little too close to home for them given that, Dorset thought as she took a step back and scanned the room warily for other Grey pilots and any officers. She really didn't want a fight out of this. Levick was clearly in the wrong, and she had been told the unit of misfits included a Gamorrean. That's probably just a story Blues give to pull the new pilot's leg, though. Sorry if we talked out of turn, Tetengo said peaceably as he moved around the table, hands up and empty aside from a few credits and his glass of brandy. Let us buy you the next round. The blonde woman nodded, relieved, as Dav pulled Levick, who'd had one tankard too many away before anything escalated again. The dark-haired woman sat as well, talking quietly to the taciturn man opposite her at the Grey's table. As far as Dorset saw, she got little response back. So anyway, Tetengo interjected. I heard the executive officer talks to his A-Wing a lot. That drew some laughs, but Dorset was confused. What? You guys have never done that? I did it all the time when I was getting flight lessons as a teen, never really stopped after I enlisted. It's considered bad luck, explained Rushi. Don't ask how that superstition began, but it exists. Dorset shrugged. I'll take my chances. If that brings me down, well, don't put it in the hollow letter to home. The thought left a bitter taste in her mouth. Of course, if something like that happened, my parents would probably tell each other we knew that was coming, and go on with their lives. Rushi reached over and gave Dorset's hand a squeeze. The touch was cold but on an emotional level carried considerable warmth. I was recently cast aside by my clan too, Rushi said gently. Dorset had no intention of asking what prompted that in front of the others. but the split-second glance between the Radian and Tetengo was answer enough. She rubbed her fingers against Rushi's in silent return, letting the body heat bleed over as she offered a bittersweet smile. "Here's to our families by birth and the ones we find in the service," Dorset said, lifting her ale. The others clinked their glasses to that, and Dorset beamed openly as she leaned back to finish the drink. Aside from earlier training, it was the closest thing to home she'd felt in a long time. Chapter 6. Dorset reported to the simulator pods at 9:25, slightly ahead of the ordered time, and glanced around. Captain Lark was there, consulting a datapad, and she guessed that meant General Crespin would be waiting behind the controls of a simulated TIE once they got started. Also waiting were Tetengo and DAV. She wondered whether they were early as well or had just been told to report at a different time in sequence. Rushi arrived at 9:28, after which Lark slid the datapad into a pocket and called them to attention. "Guess we're just operating as a flight. Mission details will be revealed at the start of today's exercise," he told the four-person group. "Assignments are as follows: Blue 1 and Flight Leader Konnair, Blue 2, Oten, Blue 3, Yivit, Blue 4, Noor." With Lark's instructions over, they each climbed up into the sim pods. Day 1, and they throw me to the deep end by putting me in charge. Well, it's an opportunity. Your mission: defend the medical frigate Redemption while it takes in injured personnel from ACR-90 Corvette and ground-based shuttles, the automated voice began. On cue, the Nebulan B appeared behind the A-wings while a Quasar Fire-class light carrier dropped in 50 clicks away. "Orders?" DAV asked, waiting on her right. Dorset closed her eyes for a moment in frustration. This simulator exercise was infamous in New Republic flight circles. The imps would dump out new groups of interceptors and bombers once the last set was gone, bleeding them by attrition. It was the bane of X-Wing pilots all over the galaxy, but then we're not flying X-Wings, are we? Dorset's eyes popped back open as she set her teeth in a predator's smile, thinking of the blue-winged cormorant tattooed on her right arm. 2. With me we'll take the fight to them and hit the Quasar carrier first. 3 and 4 cover the frigate and engage any ties that get past. Copy that, Rushi answered. Her and Tetengo as a wing pair is something to keep an eye on. Dorset vectored in toward the Quasar with DAV close behind, double-checking the status of her weapons. Word is Grey pilots get put through system failure drills a lot. Crespin may not like the concept of the unit itself, but he could definitely take that idea from Antilles and use it on us. Okay, flight weapons free. Check your lasers and torps, then report condition in sequence. 2 here, cannons hot and 6 missiles primed. 3 holding on station, with more of the same. 4 standing by, weapons at the ready. Dorset smiled at the uniformly positive reports, turning onto her wing as she and DAV closed to 10 clicks out. Focus on lasers first, save your missiles until we've worn down some holes in their shields, too. And watch out for their anti-fighter turrets, they'll be laying down a barrage. A beep from her sensor display showed 6 ties had already launched from the Quasar on a path to intercept them. Get ready for some fast action on approach. I expect this group will continue on, rather than try to maneuver back around. Take as many quick shots as you can. Dorset hoped DAV was experienced enough that she didn't need to say all that, but it would look good when Crespin and Lark inevitably checked the simulator comms. On that note, I've got one more reason why a wing pair of Rushi and Tetengo is a potential minefield. How do I split them? She'd have to think about it later, as the TIE interceptors were now seconds away from targeting range. Dorset fired across their formation without waiting to get a lock and was pleased to see a pair of them ignite after taking strikes. DAV picked off a third just before the two groups crossed. The remaining 3 squints arced away toward the Nebulan B, and Dorset shifted her focus to their carrier instead. 2 strafe the bridge. I'll hit the hangar bays. That exposes me to more fire, especially if the next wave of interceptors make it out of there, but I can take the risks. Dorset weaved back and forth on her approach, dodging fire from the trio of quad-link laser cannons in front of the hangar section, and returning her own volley at the flight of interceptors trying to get clear. 4 went down in flames within a matter of seconds, and she dove down under the hangar section to harass the Quasar's set of engines until new ties tried to launch. Leader to 3 status? Dorset asked her bunkmate over a private channel. It was possible that General Crespin or Captain Lark could check the recording later, so she had to be careful. 3 here. We're holding the line against the ties that got through, but Tetengo's spending more time covering my 6th than protecting the shuttle's Sith spawn. We just lost number 2. Dorset muttered a curse of her own, nosing back over to strafe the next set of ties racing out from the Quasar. The simulation Imperials had wised up and launched 2 full squadrons now, limiting her to only being able to knock out 3 as they veered off to attack the Redemption. Leader to 3 and 4, 2-1 ties incoming, stand by. 2, how are you doing on missiles? I only have a pair remaining, DAV told her. Figured out if I hit one spot of the shields with my lasers and then toss in torpedoes, they can slide through and cause a good bit of damage. Dorset smiled, making a mental note of the Quasar's weakness, and swung back toward DAV. 2, form up. We're going to hit them in the back and help 3 and 4 out. The group of ties included both interceptors and bombers, forcing them to fly slow and make easy targets. She led the way, firing as soon as the mixed group of enemy snub fighters came in range. They were still 20 seconds from closing on Rushi, Tetengo and the shuttles, so they had to strike fast. Dorset focused on the bombers first, largely ignoring the interceptor's attempt to turn back and fire on her and DAV. Her red lasers streaked out, bracketing one slower-moving dupe at a time. She watched as 4 of the remaining 9 exploded under her fire, with DAV claiming another pair and 1 of the interceptors. Only 3 dupes and 10 squints remained from that wave. The TIE interceptors were circling her and DAV, but Dorset was unfazed. 3 and 4, keep the bombers away from the CR-90. We'll handle the squints. At least the medical shuttles had taken a position behind the Nebulan B and its turbolaser turrets, out of danger for the moment. Dorset corkscrewed her fighter and pulled up into a hard spiral, hoping DAV would be able to stay with her in the maneuver. Fortunately, the Celestin remained on her wing throughout the climb, and she keyed the private calm button as the squints took the bait and rose with them. DAV, wait 7 seconds, then pull the brakes and reverse thrust. We'll drop down through the middle of their formation and come out below them, Dorset directed to him as her smile grew. The 2 swiveled their guns to continually track the interceptors during the maneuver, enabling them to fire continually. By the time they'd fallen far enough and were chasing the interceptors, she and DAV had clear shots on the remaining pair of squints out of the initial 6 chasing them. Dorset and her wingman made short work of those 2, then reunited with Tetengo and Rushi as the last of the 3 bombers were being destroyed. That went well, but time for a change. Leader to group, Dav's low on torpedoes, so he'll stay here and guard the shuttles with Rushi. Tetengo, you're on my wing. The tone of her voice made it clear this was not up for a debate. The new pair veered off to attack the Quasar again, and engaged the latest batch of 6 squints. Tetengo did his best to keep up with Dorset, but his A-wing remained slightly behind and kept wobbling in all directions. Twice she had to swing out when he shifted too close to her fighter. At least this makes him harder to attack. For my advice? Don't push the stick around so far, you could overcorrect and lose control completely at this speed. Go gentle with how you move it. Thanks, leader. Tetengo sounded genuinely grateful, and Dorset was relieved. Offering such suggestions to other pilots on their flying methods was always a questionable matter. They continued on, except that Tetengo's flying was much more stable now. The pair took out 4 TIE interceptors in the last flight of 6 to launch, leaving the rest to Rushi and DAV, and pressed the attack on the Quasar until it had jumped away. Her first sim run had finally ended. Chapter 7. Dorset hopped out of the sim pod once the canopy had turned white, smiling slightly to herself. 16 kills for me and no losses among our A-wings, but I'm not sure how the evac shuttles fared with Rushi covering them, and Tetengo spending more time covering her. Sit spawn. Captain Lark was inputting some final notes into a datapad, then handed it to General Crespin once he had exited from ATIE sim pod. Dorset held her breath, waiting to hear flight scores. Noor 17-0 out of 25-0. Protecting your wingman is critical, but not at the cost of risking the evacuation shuttles. Yvette 19-0. 7 kills to Noor's 5. Oten 22-0. Well done finding a weak point in a Quasar's shields. Konnair 21-0. 16 kills. You displayed initiative in the attack on their carrier, though the group lost 2 shuttles in the process of dividing forces. Criff Tengo. You had to go off task back there. His score had been knocked the most, but of course she got dinged for the losses too as the day's command pilot. I'll make it up next time. The rest of the squadron had filed into the room while they were in the simulators, and Dorset saw that the holoprojector was playing a recording of the battle from the beginning over again. I'll have to get a copy of that for myself. Maybe I can send it to my parents to say I made it. General Crespin and Captain Lark went to the commander's office, leaving the pilots at ease. Hey Flair, good job leading that attack on the Quasar. Roaven called out. She and Rady were sitting on one of the benches and eating mixed pieces of an outer rim box snack. Dorset grinned and headed for them, getting congratulatory handshakes from Lasco Javel, also a Corellian like Rady, and the bot Hongur Lyuper. The Duro's pilot Levick was standing off to the side though, and sneered at her as he cleaned a pair of dark-tinted protective goggles. Yes, hitting the Quasar is a sign of tactical intelligence, Levick said, his voice low-pitched and grating. So much so that 4 of the rest of us did it as well when we were placed in command there. When I led a flight on that run, we were able to break its back with a joint torpedo volley during the second wave of TIE interceptors. My score was 24-0, but 21-0 isn't too bad either. Dorset regarded him coolly as the other pilots glanced between them. Yeah? Good for you. His attempt at drawing a rise out of her unsuccessful, Levick turned and marched to his room. I hope that isn't part of some Duro's mating ritual, Dorset said once he'd gone, drawing laughs from the gathered human and non-human pilots alike. I'd be flattered, but quite disinterested. Don't worry, Gur said as his lips curled in amusement. Levick's just sizing up the competition. Both as the best pilot, and in who will be named as leader of third flight in the final unit roster. Dorset shifted uncomfortably. She wanted to do the best she could in training for the sake of the new Republic and yes, to prove her parents wrong, but that didn't mean she was looking to get in the middle of a potentially divisive intra-squadron battle of who was best among them. From the sounds of it, the contest was underway before I got here. Guess if I win, then I win. The remaining days in the week had 2 simulator runs each day as General Crespin had told her they would, while Blue and Gold squadrons spent the rest of their time in classes together. They studied combat maneuvers such as the head-on weaving attack devised by Commander Antilles himself, viewing his X-Wing's camera footage from the first Death Star and at Atollon. Dorset had already familiarized herself with many of the fighting techniques that predated the Galactic Civil War, including the head-on tactics of the clone pilot Oddball and the way that a particularly daring Jedi had worked with Flight Squad 7 to mask a group of V-Wings and ETA-2 interceptors under the appearance of slower ARC-170s, or BTLB Y-Wings, luring droid starfighters of the Confederacy into attacking the group and then turning the tables on them. While these classroom sessions were easy for her as a result, Dorset stayed true to her word with General Crespin upon arrival at Folor, and maintained an attentive focus throughout them. He personally offered some of the lessons, while Lark filled in for others, and they also viewed holos by the famed rebel pilot, instructor and tactician Adar Talon, a former Imperial as well. Dorset also used her experience to help out some of the other pilots. She assisted one 7-year-old Grivko Regal of Salokami with astronavigation and explained details on combat maneuvers to Tetengo, who had a good handle on flying freighters but less knowledge for their starfighters. The simulator exercises during the week included a launch under fire, where Blue Squadron had been told to cover a retreat from Folor Base only to find the necessary evacuation areas were already being bombed out of existence. Tetengo had been flight leader, though it fell to Dorset to privately recommend he call out the Omega signal and guide them away instead. The squadron's training in a simulated version of the battle at Endor had led to Dorset giving Levick a similar recommendation. With General Crespin and Captain Lark not taking part, the squadron was divided into 2 groups of 5. Levick led the first while Dorset took the second. They were midway through the run, which represented a very target-rich environment as the many ties lacked shields, when Dorset felt a chilling feeling despite her more than 20 kills. They were fighting off ties to protect the fleet and launching hit and fade strikes to keep the Star Destroyers at bay, but there was nothing the A-Wings could do about the Death Star, not while it was shielded. The operational battle station had turned its planet-killing superlaser on the fleet itself, destroying the MC-80 Independence first, and then blowing the Defiance to bits. But the Defiance wasn't lost at Endor. It was retrofitted and returned to fight in the Outer Rim. "Blue 5 to Blue 1, she said over a private channel to Levick. "I don't think the shield will come down in this exercise. Recommend giving Omega signal to all fighters, or at least ours." "Lost your nerve already, Konnair?" came his smug reply. "No, we stay here until we show we can achieve what only Rogue Squadron was able to pull off in real life. We will kill the station." "You ego-driven criffing moron," Dorset cursed at Levick and his stubbornness. "Don't be so sure." But Levick didn't listen, and pushed them to keep fighting even as a squint shot down Rady's A-Wing and Grivko was lost to a turbolaser. Then the Death Star fired once again, destroying Akbar's flagship Home 1 this time. Okay, that definitely didn't happen at the real battle. Dorset again called for him to order a retreat over the direct channel, but this time was ignored entirely. Levick was in too deep to turn back, and she wasn't willing to undercut him in the open for a simulator run that had already been lost, even if it was clear Levick would do that to her. Finally he ordered the group to try punching a hole through the Imperial's line of interdictors, with the hope of enabling what was left of the fleet to escape. But there were too few fighters and too many ties screening the interdictors. Blue Squadron was picked off one by one. Dorset wasn't above taking a small joy in seeing Levick's A-Wing downed, though, moments before 3 interceptors dropped in behind her own fighter and shredded it with laser fire. The sim pod opened and Dorset slid down its side, pulling her helmet off and brushing sweat-dampened locks of hair back. Levick was already out and glaring in her direction. She returned his gaze coldly. I tried to warn you, mudscuffer. Don't blame me for the debacle on your watch. Levick scored 35-0 out of 50-0 on that run points for his overall leadership against the enemy fighters, but not for recognizing when it was time to turn and run. Dorset had tallied less kills in the simulation, but still received a higher 41-0. General Crespin's reading of her score made it clear that he and Captain Lark had heard the exchange between her and Levick about leaving. The Duro's red eyes glowered even more at that before he stormed off without a word this time. Dorset shrugged, exchanging words with the members of her flight Lasco, Gur, Rushi, Roaven, and Grivko on how they had performed during the Death Star simulation. Their assignments for the day complete, most of the pilots headed off to the base's classroom with a projector. After dinner it was being repurposed to show a holodocumentary on the New Republic's capture of Coruscant. Dorset had already seen it, and had lived through the event itself, so she told the others she'd catch up with them midway through the screening instead. Dorset walked around the base again at first, checking out her A-wing again and flying a brief route through some of the moon's sharper canyons just for fun. The squadron had begun flying actual missions through those formations for several days now. It was one of Dorset's favorite parts of the training, getting to actually fly, low and fast, imagining the wind that would be there if the moon had a real atmosphere. She'd been practicing that style for years in her own sims. Once her flight was over, Dorset landed her A-wing back down in the hangar and slid down its wing as she had with the sim pod earlier in the day. She offered a cheery wave to Yelder as she refueled the fighter and then jogged back to her quarters for a shower, beaming as she went. Chapter 8. Dorset had returned to downtime and was sipping at a toffee-flavored cocktail when another pilot dropped into the seat next to her with a slightly metallic thud. He wasn't in Blue Squadron and didn't look to be a member of Gold either, too tall for an A-wing. This must be one of the ne'er-do-wells in Commander Antilles' Grey Squadron. Time to find out what they're about. Hopefully General Crespin doesn't learn about this. But hey, he started it. I can guess where this is going. That's a striking tattoo you've got, the X-Wing pilot said. Can I buy you a drink? And there it is. Dorset turned in her chair to face the man full on. Sure. While you're at it, how about we skip through the small talk and you move straight on to what you're after from me? The pilot coughed slightly, then took a drink from the glass he'd been given by the droid serving as a bartender. I'll have to ask Rushi and Tetengo about the story behind that, Dorset thought. I see you get right to it, even more than Sarkin did, with that other guy, the man was saying. Dorset leaned in and smirked. On an A-wing pilot, do we seem like the type to sit and wait for things to develop? No, we go charging in after it. So again, what are you after with this drink? Seemingly caught off guard, he blinked with his one real eye while the red optical replacement dimmed slightly in unison. I hope to get better acquainted with you, the man said earnestly. Dorset snorted in spite of herself at the line. Is that what you X-Wing jockeys call it now? His face flashed with a look of resignation for a moment, and she eased up. Look, it's nothing personal. I just got here. My focus is on training, and once that's done our respective units will likely be deployed to different areas for combat. I don't have time for anything long-term if that's what you mean. Dorset didn't add that he looked to be around 30, and she was barely 19 now. Instead, she moved closer with an amused expression. If it helps, you can tell your friend over there the same goes for him. Dorset canted her head in the direction of another grey pilot with a scarred face who was making a crashing motion with his hands as he watched the exchange. The one seated by her smiled, finishing his drink. To his credit, he didn't make the expected shift to proposing they just get acquainted that night. Instead, he asked if she recognized his friend. Dorset squinted slightly. He looks familiar, but I can't place it. She laughed, shaking her head. His grin broadened in reaction. Face bet me 30 credits you would being from Coruscant, so at least I won our side bet. Trust me, that just made my night. My name's Fannin, by the way. Who told you I'm from there? Dorset asked, annoyed. She didn't want that fact to get around. No one, my friend's just scarily good at picking up planet-specific body language, he replied. The man raised the empty glass in salute and then left, looking cheerful at his betting victory. Dorset shook her head as she watched Fannin sit at the table and start talking exuberantly to his friend with the scar. His expression didn't match that of someone who'd been turned down, and she wondered whether it was a facade or if he was spinning some great story of how he'd actually gotten her to agree to either a formal date or some private rendezvous that night. Or he didn't care that much about how I responded either way. She thought the conversation had come off as rather practiced. No, I was probably the latest in his series of unsuccessful attempts with women, or just a simulator run for the next one. Better luck that time, Fannin. Dorset wasn't terribly surprised. She was short and slim at slightly under 1.6 meters and about 50 kilograms. Her hair, always mussed and wavy with the occasional curl, was kept cut above the shoulder at all times to be less of an annoyance while flying or working on maintenance. Aside from her star flare tattoo, Dorset's face was marked by sharp cheekbones and appeared rather plain otherwise, aqua-tinted eyes, small nose and thin lips. She was lightly muscled from her time spent with repairs and in running or swimming, her primary forms of physical exercise. All in all, her features didn't make Dorset the type that male pilots usually flock to at the bar. If the New Republic resumed the Alliance-era practice of volunteers designated to represent their ship based on looks, she likely wouldn't fare well at that either. And that was before her tattoos were considered. Not that Dorset cared. As she told Fannin, it wasn't why she was at Folor. Even without the time issues it posed, the stories Dorset heard said that male and female pilots dating each other often either ended in tragedy, or an expectation that the woman would leave active duty. She'd just now gotten there with no intention of leaving for anyone, but Dorset supposed she could consider something decidedly less committal if it were on her own terms. The doors to downtime hissed open and the dark-haired woman from Wraith Squadron entered, scowled over at Fannin and the other pilot, then sat further down the bar. She motioned for a pint of lemon ale from the droid bartender. What is the deal with that? Then took a long drink. Dorset glanced around, debating whether to say something, and saw the bar was almost empty. Sorry about that whole situation the other day with our pilot and yours, Dorset told the woman as she hopped up onto the next seat over. Levick tends to talk a bit too much, especially after a few drinks, but I get the feeling he's not the only one around here like that. My name's Dorset. The woman snickered at the comment, then shook her hand. Fallon Sandskimmer, she said. Trust me, you're right about that. We've got a lot of guys who should learn to shut up, maybe including me, and then another who barely talks at all. But I think you've seen that already. Yeah, my commander said you were a bit of a ragtag, last chance group we should stay clear of, no offense, Dorset told Fallon. I don't mind training with him, but getting to learn combat maneuvers from the Commander Antilles must really be something. I've heard a lot of stories. Sandskimmer laughed at that. Stories, sure. But if he were still in fighting shape, do you think he'd be spending his time here with us rather than out on the front lines? No, he's gotten old. Dorset blinked in shock but didn't react right away. General Crespin's certainly been around for a while, but even he can mix it up when needed. You wouldn't lose an eye at the rear. Antilles has to be younger than that, plus he just took Coruscant and Thifera within the last year or so. Yeah, I guess, she answered noncommittally, making sure the droid wasn't able to hear them. Dorset glanced over at Fallon's jacket for something to change the subject to and saw a faded Y-wing bomber patch on the sleeve. You flew Wishbones? She asked with genuine curiosity. The aging but rugged bombers were very much not Dorset's cup of CAF. But she certainly knew not to insult them in front of a veteran pilot unless tacit permission was given by Fallon first. I did, Fallon replied before taking a long drink. I made ace, became a lieutenant, then some things happened. I got busted back down to flight officer and ended up here in Gray Squadron instead. Still picking up the hang of flying X-Wings now, at least Antilles can teach. I'm sure he can, Dorset said. For all she'd heard of Gray Squadron, she was quite glad they were there rather than Rogue Squadron. It was intimidating enough being around him, let alone his entire legendary unit. I've just heard a lot of stories about him and other pilots, you know? Definitely, Fallon answered, grimacing. With his stories, I swear my old commander would have worshipped the sand that band the herder Skywalker walks on if he got a chance. Lucky bastard. That wasn't at all what I meant by stories. But with talk like that about Antilles and Skywalker, I see how you got demoted and why General Crespin told us to stay away from your squadron. It's been a long day, Fallon explained after a pause, offering a bitter grin. When I was in the Y-Wing squadron I had a chance to be among the best at dogfighting in them, but then I blew it. Now I'm trying to work my way back up in this unit of Criff-ups, most of whom have barely seen action or hold no combat experience at all. Not really how I thought my life would go after I borrowed a light freighter out of Mos Eisley to join the New Republic military 2 years ago. Mos Eisley, you're from Tatooine? Dorset asked, recognizing some of Fallon's hostility now. The other dark-haired woman nodded. Yeah. Sandskimmer's one of the names like Skywalker that they give slaves and orphan children of unknown parents there. I was the latter. Once I joined the New Republic, there was a constant stream of expectation that I'd do great piloting things like he did. It's like no other rebels ever left that cursed rock, not even the Darklighters. I can understand being held down by the baggage from home, I guess. That goes a long way toward explaining her attitude on Skywalker, Dorset thought. She'd heard whispered stories about the Jedi and then New Republic tales, but viewed them ambivalently rather than with the reverence of former rebel personnel or Fallon's resentment of Tatooine's most famous son. Dorset took a long drink while she debated whether to open up further, then set the glass down and went for it. My parents had their own expectations of a different sort. They always told me that I'd never make anything of myself if I became just a pilot. It was always law or medicine or something in the arts, a perfectly boring job that would turn me into the vehicle for their rise in social standing. Well, I say Criff their expectations of us. Let's be pilots for ourselves, Fallon. The Tatooine woman laughed slightly, then raised her bottle in salute, and drank some more ale. Have you met any of the other Gray Squadron members, aside from that time in the cafeteria? Dorset nodded. A few ran into Fannin just now, she said, glancing back to see he'd left. Ah, yes, Fallon said with a smile. He'll probably try to strike up a conversation with you soon, now that he's worked his way through all the women in Gray Squadron except for Jasmine, our Mon Calamari pilot. Even Fannin knows well enough to steer clear of the Admiral's niece. He just did try with me. Actually, I disrupted his approach vector and left him in a tailspin. Now that I wish I'd gotten to sea, Fallon told her. Sorry, but we've got early sim exercises. She finished her bottle off and one long drink, then stood. Nice talking to you, Officer Konnair. Dorset sipped at the remainder of her beverage. Sandskimmer was definitely one of the Grey Squadron hotheads that Crespin had warned of, but she liked how the woman zealously stuck up for her squadmates. Plus, they were the same age, even if Fallon had more time in service. I'll have to keep my distance, but maybe that could change once we don't answer to General Crespin anymore, if Fallon hasn't been drummed out of Starfighter Command yet. Dorset laughed out loud, then downed the drink and left some credits for it. Chapter 9. The training continued on for another week. More simulator runs, more classroom instruction, more live flights without ammunition. There was even some mentoring of the Gold Squadron pilots still undergoing basic level education. Dorset was assigned to work with an Outer Rim woman named Carmilla Rendon. Levick had been briefly stymied by his experience with the Death Star simulation, but soon returned to the usual brashness and expression of superiority. The last sim exercise of the week involved an intercept of unspecified pirate forces performed by all 10 trainees. General Crespin had designated Levick as the squadron lead for the day. Sensor detection, Lasco said 30 seconds in. 2 modified fighters, 1 Lancer pursuit ship. The pair of fighters came into clearer view. Both were X-wing bodies with squint wing panels. 2 uglies and a glorified freighter? Levick asked contemptuously as they all checked their scopes for any other craft, and came up empty. This will be a walk in the park, fights on. Dorset was inclined to agree, but that made her nervous. No way Crespin would actually give a milk run operation to us, even on week's end. It can't be that easy, something's not right here. Levick had already opened up his thruster before she could switch to a private channel and asked him to wait. Even in simulators, command was respected. His enthusiasm simply made him the first to die as the Lancer opened a hidden group of launch tubes and fired a brace of torpedoes. They should have been relatively easy to dodge, but the pair of X-interceptors had locked onto the Duro's A-wing with underslung ion cannons and disabled his fighter in the path of the missiles. His cry that he couldn't maneuver was cut off in the explosion that swiftly followed, and these pirates were just getting started. Crespin had put Levick in charge but said nothing about who would be second in command, and the ego-driven Duros hadn't bothered with it either. Grivko, flying as Blue 10, was asking what to do in a panic as their attack formation faltered. Quiet down, Dorset ordered, even though she didn't know exactly what she would say next. All fighters hold position. Blues 2 and 3, take them on the left. Blue 4, hang back to cover them. Blue 6 and 7, do the same from the right side, I'll watch your tail. Blue 10, 11, 12 circle behind them and attack. They may be better, but there's more of us. If we wheel around and get their corners, we can pull this off. All right, everyone, execute now. The A-wing trios shot out in formation, whipping around as Dorset had directed. She wasn't half as confident in the impromptu plan as she had sounded, but the other trainees were buoyed by her enthusiasm. Once they'd reached their positions, they quickly began concentrating on the Lancer while trying to dodge its return fire and stay clear of the dangerous X-interceptors. The one on the left dropped in behind Blues 2 and 3 and opened up on them, dodging fire from Blue 4. Dorset watched as the other X-interceptor tried to get behind the pair she was escorting and locked her sights on it. The ugly started juking immediately, dodging her fire with ease and pouring lasers into the rear shields of Blue 7 DAV. Come on, Doors, you laid out the strategy, got them to attempt it, and now you've done criff all to protect them. She managed to reacquire a targeting lock and fired 3 bursts, saw them hit the X-Interceptor's rear shields, and suddenly the opposing fighter was rolling over to attack her. Okay, ugly, let's go head-to-head then, Dorset thought. This can't be a programmed pilot in the sim, but if General Crespin and Captain Lark are flying the X-Interceptors, who's in the Lancer? She danced around in her A-wing, barely managing to keep clear of the ion cannon shots, and tried to get a fix on the ugly as its pilot did an even better job of flitting about. The X-Interceptor was closing fast, and Dorset cursed as her lasers only landed a single hit against its shields. She wrenched the A-wing back around once they merged, executing a tight turn that slammed her into the left side of the cockpit despite the inertial dampeners. Blue 4, take command of the group. I'm keeping this ugly occupied, Dorset told Lasco Javel between gritted teeth as she finished the maneuver. Wait, where the criff did that X-Interceptor even go? There was no sign of the fighter on her scopes, just a clump of mixed signals back where the rest of the squadron was trying to engage the Lancer and the other ugly. The lack of any debris aside, their battleground didn't have major obstacles that the ugly she was engaging could run into except for the asteroid field about a click and a half above Dorset's fighter. Wait, oh criff. She pulled the stick back, trying to get her nose up to face the asteroids, and finally saw where the ugly was waiting among them. It had already fired. The lasers tore through her shields and ripped the port wing clean off her A-wing. Dorset checked that she wasn't up on comms before cursing. The A-wing was rocking back and forth, and it took several seconds to right its course. Half a dozen alarms were going off throughout the cockpit, but she didn't have time to focus on them yet. Right now, Dorset needed to think about surviving the next few seconds in the sim. The ugly wasn't firing again, at least, and she checked the condition of the left engine. It was still operable, so she gingerly turned full power back on to try and evade what would be next. The X-Interceptor had dropped in behind her and was firing shots that went just past the A-wing in all directions. Dorset cursed as she realized they were meant to box her in, rather than failed attempts at actual hits. Blue 5 to Blue 4, this one's toying with me. I'll try and keep him occupied as long as possible. Give you all a better chance for a while. What's your status? For here the other one's really good, we're getting slaughtered. There's 6 left, we're trying to regroup and dash. Lasco's transmission cut out in a burst of static as his fighter exploded. Dorset switched back to the main channel, her heart sinking as the attack plan she'd personally offered continued its fall to pieces almost as much as her A-wing was being torn apart by that criffing ugly. Lasers had pierced its left engine, despite her best efforts, and set it on fire. The damage only made survival even less likely, and Dorset slammed her fist into a control panel in frustration. Just finish this, she growled over a direct channel to the enemy fighter, before dipping into a string of obscenities in 4 languages she'd learned at the spaceports. The damage pushed her A-wing into a rapid spin. Dorset had to fight to remain conscious and keep from vomiting. The control vanes were shot off next, and she grudgingly admitted it was impressive marksmanship by the enemy pilot to score such precise hits under these conditions. Dorset wasn't sure which fact was more humiliating, that the pilot was using her fighter for target practice, or that her attack plan had been foiled without him even taking part in that. The odds had been 8-2 for the group, and now they were gone. Dorset kept on with attempts to evade and maneuver around for a chance to take a head-to-head shot, until the ugly crippled her A-wing with a shot through the right engine and dropped a torpedo on her. At last, the canopy turned a blinding white. Dorset swallowed, then climbed out to rejoin the rest of her squad mates. It still felt like she was carrying twice her usual weight. She wiped a sheen of sweat from her brow before it reached her eyes. Now for the damned debriefing. Dorset, still frustrated and discouraged by what had happened, did her best to avoid looking up at the other pilots she had failed. To her surprise and even greater dismay, General Crespin and Captain Lark had been watching the exercise on the holoprojector display the entire time. "They're out here. Who are we flying against in the sims? Please don't let them be Grey Squadron or trainees from Gold. I'll be the laughing stock of the entire base if it were." With luck, the unknown pilots would be revealed as members of Rogue Squadron or even Luke Skywalker himself. But then Dorset's day had already proved to be very unfortunate so far. General Crespin had stood, waving the blue squadron pilots to gather around him. Dorset fell in with the circle, forcing herself to finally meet the gaze of the others. At least they didn't appear to be angry with her, or they were just waiting until Crespin and Lark had left to really bring it up. She was still coming down from the heart-pounding adrenaline of the chase, and now only felt a sinking feeling overall and queasiness in her stomach. Dorset had to focus on not getting sick. Most of her life up to this point had been built around becoming a pilot. For the first time, she had doubts about whether that would happen, if her parents had been right about it all along. It wasn't just that she had been shot down. Dorset wasn't so vain with her flying skills as to think that could never happen. No, this sudden crisis of confidence came from the way she had been powerless to evade her unknown foe, and how 8 of her peers couldn't even defeat just 2 enemy ships using the plans Dorset had quickly drawn up from all her studies of past battles. "Clearly that exercise went poorly," General Crespin began. "Any suggestion on improvement?" Dorset racked her brain for an answer, a way to redeem herself, but again came up short. If she hadn't been surrounded by the others, this latest failure might have brought her to tears. Calliope glanced at her apologetically and raised a hand. Facing an enemy element that had turned back one attack already and evidently had superior firepower and skill, it may have been prudent to execute a rolling retreat and wait for additional reinforcements, he said, describing how the A-wings could group into 3 trios. 2 would flee while the other provided covering fire, trading that role. "Of course, I make this recommendation with the benefit of hindsight, sir." General Crespin nodded in satisfaction. "Well said. The reason for this lesson is to remind you all that we are not infallible nor invulnerable. I've seen far too much complacency lately, and a lack of respect for the skill of Imperial forces even in spite of their losses. As a former member of the 84th Fighter Group, I can assure you that this underestimation comes at your peril." Chapter 10. Once Crespin had finished his speech, he glanced over to the remaining sim pods, 2 for the ties and 1 rectangular one with multiple seats that filled in for all larger craft. They opened, and she saw Lieutenant Jansen was the first to exit. "Trainees, attention!" he called, and they instinctively stiffened up as directed. It confused Dorset, though. Even as she was relieved Wes Jansen was about the last person in command that she would expect to instill decorum. Following behind him came Commander Wedge Antilles. Dorset's breath caught in her throat. She knew now why everything had gone so wrong for them during the simulation. This only left the Lancer's pilot and gunner, who soon appeared as well. "Oh, no criffing way. That does it." General Han Solo, instantly recognizable by his vest, white shirt and Corellian blood stripes, dropped down from the multi-role pod and was followed by one of the most famous Wookiees in the galaxy. "At ease," Solo told the members of Blue Squadron, though they waited for the nod from General Crespin before standing down. Wes, you know I hate all that formal stuff, right? Absolutely, the lieutenant replied with an impish grin. That's why I did it. The revelation of who they had fought against quickly salvaged Dorset's wounded morale. Of course they made mincemeat of us. They've been flying in routine combat since before even I had a first flight at 1-1. General Crespin's right about the risks of complacency, but this doesn't mean I'm not capable of making it through and improving even more. Keep your chin up, Dors. Dorset returned to her studies, flight exercises and the next simulations with a renewed vigor, and she avoided falling into the trap of overconfidence again. On the other hand, Leviktine remained as antagonistic to her as ever. Who cares? I don't need to be liked by all the pilots, just respected or tolerated. His attitude hadn't won him many friends in the squadron either. Their training continued on. A week and a half later Levik and Lasco Javel were leading the squadron's rankings for simulator performance. Dorset didn't care much who came in first, but she still did her best, and the years of experience she carried had led to this result. Dorset was so unconcerned with standings, in fact, that she freely offered advice where it was desired, helping Grivko with hyperspace calculations and Tetengo and older combat maneuvers. Even Rady had asked a question or two. When no one else was around, Corellian pride could be stronger than the power of the Force itself, in Dorset's experience. That was a factor in her lack of concern for first place. Lasco could have it, but Levik would be insufferable if he won. One of the last assignments before the announcement of a unit roster was individual canyon runs, a chance for the pilots to show their skills free of formation requirements, just flying up among the valleys and ridges of Folor's terrain. Dorset had already flown through them, and loved every second of it. She'd set up a little fan in the cockpit, providing artificial wind in her hair like she'd have back home on Coruscant. That's the best feeling in the galaxy right there. Now she was playing a hand of low-stakes sabacc with Tetengo and 3 of Folor Base's ground personnel when an alarm klaxon blared. The 2 pilots jumped to their feet, looking toward the display board that Dav Odin had been watching for any additional information. Rushi had been scheduled to take her flight half an hour ago, so they had been waiting on her. Sisbon, they're off. The Celestin cursed as one of the tracking icons flashed red about a click off the pads through the assigned flight area. Apparently a pilot hadn't been ready for this. Attention base personnel, dispatch recovery units immediately, the intercom announced in a direct message from the other fighter on location. The 3 Blue Squadron pilots looked to each other in concern. Dorset didn't think any gold pilots were up today, but it was possible. Criff. That's General Crespin's voice. Tetengo said, not entirely necessary, as they all recognized it. It could be someone from Gold Squadron, Dorset pointed out before she saw the trainees from that unit all go running past into the hangar. Blast it, guess not. Let's move. The 2 humans took off running, while Dav called after them that he'd stay and watch the monitor for more information rather than try to keep their pace. They each grabbed a vacuum suit from the stack at the entrance and sprinted for the Lambda shuttle, prepping its engines. Get in! Rushi was yelling from near the ramp, and they were relieved to know she hadn't been the one to crash. Tetengo and Dorset sprinted the rest of the way, then jumped onto the closing ramp, ducking their heads to climb into the passenger section. Dorset smacked the side of the hull twice to let the pilot know they were safely aboard as the Lambda took off at a rapid pace. It angled down to land a few minutes later, just long enough for the A-wing pilots to put on their vacuum suits and double-check each other's seals. Tetengo strapped on a medical kit and held the portable fire suppression apparatus, while Rushi and Dorset got ready to carry the inflatable atmospheric tent. If anything was cracked on the A-wing canopy or the pilot needed immediate medical attention, they could set it up to provide a temporary airlock at the scene. Folor Base's search and rescue U-wing had dropped into hover by the crash as the Lambda arrived on station. The site was marked by illumination flares from the A-wing circling around. Dorset had recognized it as General Crespin's by the markings. Crews from the two transport craft jumped out as soon as their ramps opened and sprinted as best they could to the downed fighter. The crash had started over a click away, and debris traced a path back from there. The A-wing had tumbled end over end, she could tell, and little was left of it other than the shell meant to protect the pilot inside. The engines would have broken away first, a safety measure to slow the wrecked snub fighter down and reduce the chance of explosion. They'd rehearsed the canyon runs in simulators first, and a crash there was shown by a realistic third-party view. She became painfully aware of what that looked like, but seeing the real-life aftermath was still unsettling. Tetengo caught up to them at the side of the A-wing, where Rushi was still shining her helmet light in hopes it would provoke some unexpected outcome. Dorset, on the other hand, turned to him and shook her head forlornly. Levick lay slumped against the side of the cracked canopy, dry blood on his face where he'd hit it against the glass at some point. The Duro's skin hue, usually blue, was now a pallid gray, and his crimson eyes were open but unmoving. The medical team from the U-wing joined them and forced the canopy open, no point leaving it sealed when Levick was clearly dead, and pulled him away, flying the body back to base. Soon the three pilots received an order from Crespin to return to their Lambda and head in as well. Chapter 11. Dorset cursed Levick inwardly. He'd been a great pilot, but was also obnoxiously cocky while flying and even reckless at times. She wouldn't be surprised if this emerged as a last example. At least that would mean there hadn't been something wrong with his A-wing or anyone else's. Once the shuttle landed back at the base, Dorset followed Rushi and Tetengo to the briefing room where General Crespin had assembled the trainees of Blue Squadron. The pilots were dismayed. Levick hadn't been well liked, but he was still one of them. Now he was gone. The squadron is on a 2-4-hour stand-down, effective immediately. Under standard protocols, A-wings will have to be cleared by the mechanics before flights resume. Take the day off, do whatever you feel is necessary. Pilots who need to can speak with myself or Captain Lark in private. Dismissed except for Flight Officers Javel and Konnair, Crespin told the group. Dorset and Lasco glanced at each other uncertainly, waiting as the general took off his flight helmet and gloves, then motioned for them to follow to his office. The two stood at attention. As you were, Crespin said tiredly. I don't want you to interpret what I'm about to say as an indication of blame regarding what just happened. Initial data records suggest Officer Tyne attempted a BlissX sliding skid just before the crash, without my required authorization. Dorset gasped at that. The sliding skid involved pulling out of a loop as low as possible, then twisting the controls so the fighter would rapidly reverse its horizontal orientation to fire on the enemy. The dangerous maneuver was meant to be limited to pilots with at least 1,000 hours. You damned fool, Levick. You really had to try and prove you could pull that stunt off. I understand there's an unofficial competition to be the best pilot in Blue Squadron, Crespin continued, and they both nodded. The fact that New Republic trainees, known amongst each other as Nuggets, sought to be the top nug of their respective groups was very well known. Regardless of what caused today's fatal accident, I have to order such competitions to end. The squadron can't afford to lose any more pilots, even though I don't think either of you would try a maneuver like that. That said, Flight Officer Javel was currently in first place, just past Tyne. Lasco nodded, though he looked uncomfortable. Thank you, sir. Perhaps that would be best extended to Levick, in the interest of his family. Crespin sighed. A noble gesture, but I think squadron morale is better suited by having their top pilots still living among them. You're dismissed, Flight Officer Javel, and congratulations. He turned and left, nodding to Dorset as he did. She remained standing until Crespin directed for her to sit. I know I just ended your chance at being the top pilot. You can speak freely. Dorset shrugged. I've done my best. I don't seem to be in danger of failing out. It's enough. The general smiled faintly. That's in line with the psychological profile intelligence gave. She raised an eyebrow, remembering the invasive questions of the Belosar and his droid. It said you were self-assured in your skill, aside from questions on whether you would make piloting into a career. The notes say it stems from your upbringing and your parents' views? Dorset cursed silently. She didn't like to talk about this, but it was too late for that if Adan had figured it out from his interview and recorded it. Yes, sir. My parents were insistent it wasn't feasible as an occupation not up to the standard they wanted in order to improve our social level as a family. I was as stubborn as they were. It ended poorly. I guess what they said left some small traces of doubt in my mind that they could be right, that I wasn't adequate. I don't have to be the best pilot in the squadron, General, just that I become a pilot and stay one. I guess I want to do that because I don't know anything else, sir. Crespin's smile had grown during her response. I can put those fears to rest. Not only will you be completing this training and soon, I hope, but I'm placing you in command of 3rd Flight as Blue 9 when the full squadron roster is released tomorrow. That should lift the trainees' spirits somewhat after today. We'll need your help with that. It's part of the responsibility of being a flight leader. Zsinj's forces are getting closer. There may be real-world combat soon regardless of whether everyone else is ready. Dorset felt her face set with resolve. You can count on me, sir. I've made sure of that, he continued. That pirate attack exercise where I brought in General Solo and the Grey Squadron leaders? Lieutenant Jansen was following my orders to pursue and destroy your A-wing in the manner he did. I needed to see how you would respond after such adversity, in light of the overall intelligence report that you'd lived a relatively privileged youth aside from this parental difficulty we discussed, and your exuberance when flying. Now that makes sense. Dorset thought she'd wondered whether Jansen's attacks had been caused by him getting too into the role of pirate. She had to hide a smile at General Crespin's description of her flying as exuberant as well. It certainly seemed an apt characterization. Your efforts to help the other pilots improve stood out as well, he went on. Many said they would want you as the flight leader, if they could not be selected for that role themselves. Dorset colored slightly. I didn't do that for my own benefit, sir. I know, Flight Officer, that's what makes it so fitting. Flight Officer Noor will be your wingman, with Felian and Yivit as Blue 11 and 12. I trust you can handle that combination. The look on General Crespin's face gave no sign whether he knew of Rushi and Tetengo's relationship, but Dorset suspected he did and was turning a blind eye to them. I'm on it, sir. Having Rady Felian among her flight also gave Dorset pause. She wondered whether the Corellian had backed her as a leader, given their initial butting heads in regard to the Sims. Asking General Crespin about that wasn't something she was willing to do either, though. Chapter 12. General Crespin gave out the full list of squadron assignments the following morning, adding that the mechanics had finished their checks on each A-wing and all came back in order. The unit's morale had lifted from that, and the new wing pairs broke away to talk with each other. Dorset already knew Tetengo well, largely through Rushi, and was satisfied in that assignment. Blue Squadron began a series of readiness drills later that day, and squadron meetings began to include separate gatherings for each flight. To her relief, Rady reacted well to the placement. 4 days later, Dorset and Tetengo were headed to the cafeteria for dinner. She hoped they'd found something more appetizing than the usual green pudding-like mass served as a side, and absent-mindedly remembered the morning's entertainment, hoping the general didn't hear of it. Fallon Sandskimmer had outdone her prior disrespect for authority, telling Commander Antilles to his face that he was old and washed up. Under Crespin, that would have resulted in her being put in hack for at least 2 weeks. Antilles had instead challenged the woman to a race through the pig trough using cargo haulers. Dorset had heard how he won by cheating during her lunch. She would have liked to try her hand at a race against Sandskimmer, Antilles, or one of the other X-Wing pilots, but knew Crespin would never allow it. Maybe they could do one over simulators in secret. Dorset and Tetengo had just sat down with their trays when the base's alarm klaxons blared. "Attention on base, General Quarters. All pilots report to the hangar area." The automated message ordered via the intercom. The dingy base cafeteria was suddenly lit in flashing red light. Dorset and Tetengo froze in place for a split second before she jumped to her feet, zipping up her flight suit and dropping her food. "Let's move!" she yelled to the other pilots of blue and gold squadrons before they all started sprinting for the hangar. Maybe it's just a drill, Dorset thought, even though she doubted that in her gut. There had been several of those in the previous days, so at least they knew what to do. "Sis spawn," Tetengo cursed to her as they crossed into the hangar. "I didn't even get a bite in." "Better hope it's just a drill then," Dorset said, turning and grinning at him as she ran. "Otherwise a taste of combat will have to do." Tetengo scowled at the bad joke, then broke off for his fighter. Already she'd reached the ladder to her A-wing, and Dorset took the steps 2 at a time, sliding into the cockpit and pulling the canopy closed. She quickly flipped switches to activate engines, weapons, and the targeting computer. Her snub fighter lifted up on repulsor lifts, and she was glad to see it was among the first aloft. "Blue and gold report in," Crespin said from base control. "Blue 9 underway for combat launch," Dorset said as soon as it was her turn in the chorus. "This is real world," Crespin told them once it was time to either power down or expect action. "Gray Squadron detected an incoming Star Destroyer from Zsinj's fleet. They're coming in on the most obvious heading, a few minutes from arrival. The 3 transports are loading. 4 A-wings each from Gold Squadron will escort them. Blue Squadron, Gray Squadron, remain on station for delaying action. I will join you shortly once we can engage the enemy." Dorset nodded, suppressing a laugh as Commander Antilles corrected Crespin to say his misfit unit was now called Wraith Squadron, and gave her acknowledgement when it was time. One of the A-wing exercises had involved flying all the way across Folor to set up a decoy base in the abandoned mining facilities built atop a frozen ice sheet. Her sensor readings, or the lack thereof, indicated the imps had taken the bait and were hitting the wrong side of the moon. General Crespin came back on the comm. "All squadrons, all ships, this is Folor Base. We read multiple bombing runs and strikes on target. All ready transports, Gold Squadron, launch. Good luck and may the Force be with you." Dorset grinned and rubbed her gloved hands together as the first Gallo-free transport took to the sky and passed overhead. It reminded her of simulator runs for the Hoth evacuation, and she idly wondered whether the ice ball was somehow colder than Folor's lack of atmosphere. "Enemy ships incoming," Crespin told them. His voice was now mechanically condensed. He'd taken off to lead the group into battle. "Confirm implacable and escorts oncoming by the most direct course. Borlea's Bright Nebula, Are you ready to lift? Dorset heard Bright Nebula-S captain respond in the affirmative, while Borleas reported an ion engine initializer malfunction. Now Crespin was relaying those details to the renamed Wraiths. Blue Squadron, Grey Squadron Wraith Squadron, we're going to have to buy them some time and hope they can make use of it. Commander Antilles, any suggestions? The X-Wing commander was discussing the likelihood that the Imp forces would come across the Pig Trough on their path to the Rio base, and Dorset half listened as she adjusted her map to check the course being discussed and review it from her memory of flying in the canyons. I suggest we calculate the interception point that ties and the implacable will most likely pass. Antilles was responding. Send a unit of spotters to some point even farther north of that point to confirm their arrival. Have them powered down so they won't show up on routine scans. When the ties reach the trench, Wraith and Blue squadrons pop up out of it and chew them up. Our spotters can either fall on them from behind or hit the implacable if it's close enough to cause them some consternation. Crespin approved the plan, using 2 pilots from each squadron. Antilles dispatched his 5 and 6 pilots. Dorset assumed he'd have his executive officer lead the second flight, as Crespin did, but now she was being ordered to follow suit with Noor. Guess that's not Jansen, Dorset thought to herself. Blue 9 acknowledges, heading out now. This is a definite sign of faith from General Crespin. We may have to fight off 6 squadrons. Combat aside, she knew a pair of things with certainty. 1. No self-respecting X-Wing jockey would willingly come in second to anyone else. 2. It was her duty to ensure that happened. Chapter 13. The race was on. There's no way Commander Antilles would put Fallon in command of a wing, but maybe she's Wraith 6, Dorset thought. The X-Wings were in front, and she let them enter the Pig Trough first. There'd be plenty of time for her and Tetengo to catch up and pass them. As expected, they rocketed alongside the X-Wings within the first straightaway and then blasted by. Dorset gave the Wraiths a jaunty wave as she slipped by and left them in her lunar dust. The lead held for several minutes before one of the X-Wings, flying with either reckless abandon or greater experience, sped through a turn from behind and nearly smashed into her with its keel. Son of the Sith! Dorset cursed as she veered away from the intruding fighter and popped over the valley rim. The X-Wing had rolled so they were cockpit to cockpit, and its pilot returned the earlier wave. She offered an obscene salute with her left hand, regaining control with the right. Tetengo had slowed to stick with her rather than remain ahead of either X-Wing, and now they were both trailing as the sharp turns kept them from using full throttle. By the time they regained sight of their opposing pair, it was too late. The X-Wings were landing at the preselected spot. Dorset cursed again as she flew over them on repulsors and then sat down, adjusting her visual sensors. As expected, one of the Wraith pilots had started to taunt them on standard frequency. Glad you two could join, we've been here a while. Would you relieve us while we take a nap? She chortled, rolling her eyes. Who are we talking to? Dorset asked as she began shutdown procedures for most systems. The Wraith identified himself as Keltainer and his wingman as Hohas, Runt, Ekwesh. She recognized Tainer's name, having seen him around base before. The most memorable time had been that very morning, when a spring-loaded toy popped out of the former commando's locker and scared him in front of everyone. She thought about making a light joke about it, then decided against reminding him since they were on the brink of combat. One of the other Wraiths may have been a past child actor, but Dorset thought Kel was most likely to be in the Holos now. The other one was from Thaqua. His species certainly stood out. Dorset Konnair, Blue 9, she told them. The pretty boy to my port is Tetengo Noor, Blue 10. You two got some fair speed out of those outdated piles of junk. Kel thanked her smugly, but Dorset couldn't let it end there, not when the A-Wing's reputation and that of Blue Squadron was at stake. Besides, the back and forth with him was an amusing diversion from the impending battle. Pity Tainer's so infatuated with one of his squad mates that half of Folor Base knows about it, Dorset thought to herself. Especially when he's a Wraith who General Crespin doesn't disapprove of. Maybe he'll break off for something that isn't serious. Of course, we would have beaten you if Tetengo here hadn't remembered he'd left something in the oven back at base. We went back for his supper, she told them. Noor joined in, saying he couldn't go into battle hungry. The channel picked up a burst of static that sounded like a laugh. Let's just keep that little story to ourselves, Kel replied in a mocking tone. We don't want Blue Wing pilots to pick up a reputation for turning tail. Dorset hissed, her outrage buzzing over the calm channel. You'll get it for that, she said even as she struggled to hold in a laugh at the retort. Damn him, but Kel's good at this. I like it. You have your visual sensors oriented toward the projected arrival zone? Kel asked, focused again on the impending threat. Naturally, she replied drily. Oops, Tetengo told them. Now off-channel, Dorset sighed. Helping guide him may have helped her get the coveted role as leader of Third Flight, but it could be taxing sometimes. Snap it up, 10. Sorry I just made you look bad in front of the Wraiths, Tetengo said jovially on the frequency they shared so Kel and Runt couldn't hear them. Anyway, I'm the pretty boy. I'm surprised you didn't save that appellation for Tainer, given how you two were just going at it. Dorset groaned and guiltily shifted her gaze away from the closer X-Wing flown by the Wraith in question, glaring instead at Tetengo and his A-Wing. Please don't tell me I was that obvious. I'm fairly certain I could pick it up on sensors, 9. Between what I know of you and the things you were saying, that might as well have been a race to somebody's sleeping quarters. She shrugged, exaggerating the motion enough that Tetengo could see. Maybe Kel will finally get over that other Wraith so he and I can do just that once the new base is established. Yeah, maybe. You know your communications are still on the full group frequency, right? Dorset frantically reached for her dial, glancing wide-eyed to see if Tainer was visibly reacting to her comment without the context of what Noor had been saying. She saw nothing from him, and a quick look down revealed that she was still toggled on the Wingpair private channel after all. You criffing liar, Dorset said in mock indignation, bemused at how easily he'd gotten to her. Made you look. Wait, I think I've got something. She heard a quick click, and now Tetengo was actually talking to her, Kel and Runt together. I have them. A moment later, and Kel asked for him to share the data. Score 1 point for A-Wing's advanced sensor package, Dorset thought. The Implacable had already deployed TIE fighters, and they were inbound from the north. She put her calculation skills to use, measuring where on the map the ties would cross the trough. Kel asked if they ran the numbers just as she was finishing up, and she responded affirmatively. I'll show you mine if you'll show me yours, Kel answered. Dorset glanced over with a raised eyebrow and a smirk before reading off her results, and finding they matched closely with his. The ties were 4 minutes from the pig trough, and now Tetengo had picked up Implacable with his sensors as well. It was hanging back significantly from the ship's fighter screen. The signal wouldn't be this strong if they didn't already have their shields up. The captain in charge of that Star Destroyer is pretty cautious. Blues, do you think there's anything we can do about that capital ship? Kel asked them as they all waited, nervous and impatient. I don't think so, Dorset replied, slightly amused by the question. I suppose we could crash into her bow like bugs hitting a speeder bike. That might upset their frail temperaments. He sarcastically told her that was a charming image, then fell silent for a moment before coming back over the calm. Blues, Ray 5. Our astromechs are factory new. No sense of history to them. Do either of you have any of the older encryption codes in your computer records? Tetengo answered that he had a long set of expired frequencies no longer in use. Kel began to lay out his plan, saying that it would definitely draw Implacable's attention away from the base. Sounds dangerous, Dorset answered. Count me in. Glad to hear it, Kel replied. Because you two will be the prize for any tractor beams. Wait, what? Tetengo interrupted, sounding horrified. We can reassess this once the plan's been laid out. 10. Wraith 5, you were saying? Thanks. You two pose as the Millennium Falcon undergoing mechanical problems, which is certainly believable and will be Rogue Squadron. Broadcasts with the Dare 114 encrypt, and the imps should break away from the base and come after us for a capture. As soon as they realize they've been had, though, all bets are off. They'll likely fire everything out of spite. I'm still in, Dorset answered. Tetengo, you good with that? There was a short pause before he answered. Let's get it over with. Excellent, because I have an idea to help sell this. If we oscillate our shields in unison, we'll appear as one vessel on sensors. Do that with your 2 X-Wings and you should look like 6 fighters, maybe 8. If they decide to fire rather than use tractors, we'll be in trouble, but that would be true even if we had shields at full strength. I'll be Leia for obvious reasons. You guys pose as Rogue Squadron pilots? Unless someone wants to be Han. Real subtle doors. Not to be a killjoy, but it's probably best we keep comms to a minimum so no one says anything that gives it away, Kel replied. You're Leia, I'll be Rogue too. If I pose as Commander Antilles, I'll never hear the end of it. The imps still think he's leading them, and I want to keep it that way. Dorset nodded to herself. General Crespin probably wouldn't be pleased they were taking part in such a crazy stunt, but at least she and Tetengo could explain that it was the Wraith's idea. Want any suggestions on Alderaanian phrases to sound more convincing? Kel asked her. Sure you're from Alderaan? She questioned back, curious. I thought he was from Sluis Van. No, but I knew a few people who were in the commandos. Droppers, mainly. Anyway, coax was a word they used a lot. Soothe, too. More gentle terms like that increased after signing of the Non-Aggression Pact and all, for whatever good it did. Chapter 14. The impromptu planetary linguistics lesson over, they each adjusted shields and boosted power to their transponders, making it easier for Implacable to detect them. Here goes nothing, Dorset thought as she changed comm encryption protocols over to Dara 114. Han, can't you coax any more speed out of that pile of junk? Kel asked in fake frustration. He'd taken his own advice to heart, and was posing as Tycho Selchu, she guessed. Typical hotshot X-Wing flyboys. If you can't be the leader, you take the next best thing. Dorset smiled and tried to adopt a worried regal inflection that might carry through all the calm distortion. Han can't come to the cockpit right now. He's up to his armpits in what's left of the main engines. We've got only repulsor lifts running. Princess, repulsor lifts aren't going to get you off Folor. If you can't get those engines up in a couple of minutes, go to ground and hide out. We'll try to come back for you, Kel replied. Good idea using the royal title if you're pretending to be an Alderaanian as well, Dorset thought. That's very encouraging, Rogue 2, she answered, making sure her voice dripped with the sarcasm Princess Leia was known for, usually reserving only against Solo himself. Runt came over the comm now, on the secure frequency. Implacable is moving on our position from the east, about 40 clicks away and closing fast. The erstwhile formation was moving at a crawl on repulsors only, so the Star Destroyer and any accompanying vessels would have no trouble catching them. Kel probably loves this, watching us A-wings move like Celestin snails. Dorset wondered idly if the whole thing had been thought up at their expense. He could be recording us on video now, to let the other wraiths watch how he pulled one over on the Imps and Blue Squadron, she thought, shaking her head. Dorset wouldn't be too angry if he did, though she'd have to at least act like it for the sake of the squadron image. Besides, they would get another chance to show off their fighters' greater speed once the charade ended. She and Tetengo were flying with barely a meter between their wingtips, ensuring they'd look like one vessel on sensors, while Kel and Runt were in the top cover position that would be expected for VIP escort. Implacable had reached weapons range, but held its fire at least. "They're gaining on us. I give you 2 minutes before we have to cut and run," Kel told her. "Just hang on a little while, Rogue 2. We're almost there," Dorset begged, laying the damsel in distress act on as thick as possible. "No reason we couldn't wring as much fun out of this as we can to watch it on Kel's recording later, assuming that we all live to do so." Kel interrupted her train of thought with welcome news, though it was well disguised. "Falcon, sorry you're on your own. Go to ground, get to cover. We'll meet up with you at, new downtime." He said it was their agreed-upon code for a Borlea's launch, and Dorset replied in kind. The 4 pilots switched off the program changes that had transformed their sensor reading and kicked in full throttle, diving for cover in the pig trough. Implacable gave chase at flank speed as Dorset gritted her teeth. This would be close. General Crespin was giving the order for all pilots to regroup and try to jump to hyperspace for an eventual rendezvous point. "On our way, sir," she told him. "Implacable is hot on our tail. I can't give you an accurate guess for arrival." Dorset craned her head up toward the massive ship and saw its tractor array fixing in on their position. If they tried to take us alive anyway just for revenge, she clamped down on the fearful thought and focused on maneuvering through the trough with all deliberate speed. Suddenly the Star Destroyer opened up with every laser cannon it could bring to bear, pouring fire on their position. The canyon wall 70 meters to port detonated first, pieces of stone flying in every direction amid flashes of blinding yellow light. Debris bounced off her A-wing's nose and left scratches in the canopy glass, despite the shields, as she loosed a string of curses. Wraith 6, the one called Runt, told them to follow him and said this would be easy. Dorset wasn't sure he knew what that word even meant. They were enveloped in one cloud of debris after another as Implacable laid down a continuous barrage, shockwaves tossing the A-wings around in particular, but they didn't run into the side of a cliff despite running on full throttle. It was like the Skyfire displays the Empire held on Coruscant for special occasions, launching bursts of colorful light into the twilight air to detonate harmlessly over the city. Dorset loved to watch them as a child and had to admit that dodging her way through a similar but not at all safe set of explosions was somewhat exhilarating. Of course, that could all end in an instant. The 4-ship formation executed a sharp right turn with Runt in the lead and was suddenly clear of the turbo-laser bombardment, as Implacable's targeting focused on the canyon ridge's upper edges, rather than the bottom layer where the snub fighters now flew out of sight. Dorset took the slight deceleration in stride and checked her A-wing's condition with both sensors and visual inspection, directing Tetengo to do the same. Smoke was rising from a half-dozen holes in the nose and stubby wings where debris heated to molten temperature struck the fighter, plus she had a chunk the size of her head missing from the right wing. If that superheated rock hit another half a meter to the left, it could have torn through the canopy and landed in my lap, Dorset thought, her mind filled with unpleasant images of the scorching result. She shook her head, pushing hair back under the cloth helmet and out of her eyes. Blue 9, Blue 10 status? Kel was asking, continuing on as impromptu flight leader. We're chewed up, Wraith 5. But we can make it back to the group, Dorset answered. He suggested they climb out of the trench and cut straight across to their respective squadrons, and she was happy to leave the pig trough behind and make her way through empty space. As they were doing so, however, Kel suddenly started heckling implacable some nonsense about a dinner squadron, and Runt joined in before Kel came back to tell the imps they'd been humiliated. Dorset sighed and rolled her eyes, glancing over to Tetengo and shaking her head repeatedly. If General Crespin heard they joined in this, they'd never get off KP duty. The two squadrons were lining up for departure as Kel, Runt, Dorset and Tetengo fell in with their respective units. They had faced 2-to-1 odds during the delaying action, which came at a steep price for Blue Squadron, 3 dead and 2 more fighters lost after ejection. Dorset had known all the pilots they lost: Dav Oten, Gerliaper, Grivko Regal. At least Rushi and Lasco survived and were safely retrieved in the search and rescue U-wing flown by Captain Lark. The Wraiths had been luckier. Their only serious damage was to Jessamine Akbar's X-wing, and she had been able to break away from the battle. The plan was for the two units to regroup at the same location, though the Wraiths were going to complete a pre-scheduled hyperspace jump exercise first, and then rendezvous at a system with the charming name of Doldrums. 12 hours later, the Wraiths were still missing. Dorset had started to get worried over it. With Blue Squadron's losses, they were lucky that Gold Squadron was still in the initial training phase and hadn't been narrowed to just 1-2 pilots yet. That would likely provide replacement members. Crespin, Lark and Gold Squadron's de facto commander Captain Todra Main of Noor had been huddled up in Crespin's quarters on Borlias, trying to determine how to handle the personnel changes. In their absence, the A-Wing pilots were given a well-earned break from alert status. Dorset had spent the first hours checking in on the other members of Third Flight, as Tetengo was with Rushi in the medical ward and Rady had known Grivko well. Following that, she retired to her quarters to review the combat footage of the other Blues and see what lessons could be learned from it. Dorset was trying to distract herself from thoughts on what could have the Wraiths missing and largely failing. Where in the criff are they? At least I got through my first battle and did well. No direct engagement, so no kills. But I helped lead an entire Star Destroyer on a wild bandit chase and saved who knows how many lives. I've done it. I'm a full-blown pilot now and nothing's taking that away regardless of what's next. Even if I were to wake up with that criffing blood-burn illness tomorrow, I'd still have this moment. Thank you for listening to this production from Makati Productions. If you enjoyed this, then please leave a like and subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss any more original Star Wars stories. Thank you, and may the Force be with you.